to our Metro Community College Culinary School. And we will have a welcome
Good morning, Carrie.
by the president of Metro Community College at lunchtime. So we look forward to hearing from Randy. But at this time, could I ask the clerks of each county, starting with Douglas, to do a roll call?
Morning. Commissioner Boyle, Commissioner Kavanaugh, Commissioner Duda,
Here.
Commissioner Kraft,
Here.
Commissioner Morgan,
Here.
Commissioner Rogers,
Here.
Madam Chair.
Here. Lancaster?
Oh, I guess I'm standing. Sorry. Our clerk isn't here today. We have Commissioner Amundson, Commissioner Wilchin.
Yep.
Let's see, Commissioner Shore.
Here.
That's
Okay.
it.
Sarpy?
Commissioner Warren? Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Commissioner Kelly?
Here.
Commissioner Carlisle?
Okay, well then, welcome, and I think we have a lot of new faces actually this time around, and so if we could go around and just introduce ourselves and tell us what county you're from and what position you hold, and we'll start over here.
You have instructor?
Yeah.
Tim Gay, lobbyist for Sarpy County.
I'm Don Kelly. I'm a commissioner, Sarpy County.
Ellen Sexer, Administrative Assistant, Douglas County Clerk's Office.
Deanne Ash, Douglas County Clerk.
Ann Taylor, Administrative Assistant, Lancaster County Clerk's Office.
Joe Cohout, lobbyist, Lancaster County.
Sean Kelly, lobbyist, Douglas County. Mike Kelly, work for Sean. Mark Kraft, County Commissioner.
Mark Duda, Edwards County Commissioner.
Roland Anderson? Lancaster County Commissioner?
Larry Dix, Executive Director of NACO.
Diane Battiato, Douglas County Assessor Registry Deeds.
DJ Morgan, County Commissioner.
Deb Shore, Lancaster County Commissioner.
Jim Johnson, Sarpy County Commissioner. Brian Hanson, Fiscal Administrator for Sarpy County. Jim Warren, Sarpy County. Ryan Drew, Sarpy County, like. Scott Rowley, Deputy County Administrator, Sarpy County.
Nicole Spitzenberger, Sarpy County Attorney's Office.
Deb Hotelling, Sarpy County Clerk.
Renee Lansman, Chief Deputy, Sarpy County Clerk.
Chris Rogers, Douglas County Commissioner.
Leah Baez, Public Information Officer, Douglas County.
Patrick Bloomingdown, Douglas County Administrator.
Diane Carlson, Deputy County Administrator, Douglas County. Kevin Hall, Assistant County Administrator, Douglas County.
Marcus Martin, Douglas County Labor and Governmental.
Joe Lorenz, Douglas County Finance Director.
Mark Wayne, Sarpy County Administrator.
Ian Pittman, Sarpy County Assessor.
Brenda Carlisle, Sarpy Commissioner.
Mike Jones, Director of Corrections. Dennis Meyer, Lancaster County Budget Fiscal Director. Terry Egan, Administrator for Lancaster County.
I'm Brad Johnson, the Interim Director of Lancaster County Department of Corrections.
Brett Dewey, Director of Community and Government Relations, Sarpy County. Todd Wilchin, Lancaster County Commissioner.
We got somebody come in late back there.
Hi, my name's Tim Ruiz. I'm with Lincoln Independent Business Association.
Nice to meet you. And Mary Ann Borgeson, Douglas County Commissioner. Today, we'll, as always, start off with our legislative agendas for each county. And Lancaster, do you want to start us off? Carrie, are you going to do the?
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Kerry Egan. I'm the administrator for the Lancaster County Board of Commissioners. Everyone should have gotten a copy of Lancaster County's legislative priorities. It was a one-pager, and that really is the more important sheet. I've also given you a rather lengthy document. There will not be a copy on it later, but that's our county proposals. It's where we do our brainstorming. We ask everyone to come up with their legislative ideas for the year. We recount the previous year. So there is some good information in there, but I won't dwell on that too much. Lancaster County now has a standing priority, property tax relief, and we've just decided we're going to carry this over year after year after year. Seems like every year we have different challenges as far as pressure on the property tax. I think this year will be no exception with the revenue shortfall at the state level. We have to worry about them balancing their budget on the backs of the counties. So we will certainly keep our eyes and ears open for that possibility. The last time we had an economic turndown, of course, we lost the prisoner aid and the state aid to the counties, about $3 million for Lancaster County. So it was quite a significant hit. We also worry about an increase in unfunded mandates that come down during times like this. It's just another way that the state can move the problem on down. So property tax relief will continue to be our number one thing that we watch for whenever the legislature gets together. The first item we have numerically is to monitor adult and juvenile justice reform. With LB 605, we're worried that we're going to see an increase in the adult jail population. In fact, I think all 3 counties are experiencing a spike at this time. We don't have the wherewithal to know exactly where the increase is coming, but we're going to monitor that very carefully. Of course, the state did appropriate a whopping $500,000 for the entire state to cover the costs of some of the costs of the increase in jail populations if it's caused by 605. But I think we're at least a year away from being able to develop the statistical wherewithal to even track that information. So we will keep an eye on that. Juvenile justice is another area that we think is not being adequately funded by the state. And the cost of post-adjudication detention is state responsibility, but it's constantly being shifted to the counties. There's an item on the agenda later on per diems, and we'll discuss how that is happening with inadequate per diems and the number of kids who are under state probation who are being held. By example, we now have 3 kids pre-adjudication in our 60-bed facility. We have 33 kids who are under probation, and we're not getting adequately reimbursed on the per diem. So there are also statutes that say that for whatever programs for post-adjudication, that if there's not sufficient funds, then the county shall appropriate a fund, which is kind of a catch-all. In the early 90s, that was causing Lancaster County big problems because of the out-of-home placements. The state simply wasn't appropriating the money and was just saying, well, counties, you've got to pay. And I think I remember about a 5-year period, our budget for out-of-home placements went from about $100,000 to almost $1 million before we were able to get that under control and didn't keep going back down. Number 2 is an interesting thing that's, I guess, only particular to Lancaster County. Sorry, Douglas County, but we like our civil service system better than your civil service system. And we did get legislation passed last year, LB 742, which changed the population threshold from 300,000 to 400,000 when lots of changes occur to county government when you get that 300,000. It's now 400,000. At the last minute, though, the state AFSCME union came in and objected to the Civil Service Commission changing. It almost killed the whole bill, but thanks to Joe Cohout and friends, and we were able to save the rest of the bill. They simply removed the civil service from being covered. So right now we are still subject to the $300,000 person population threshold for that, but we think that's important. We'll continue to work on that to try to get that last piece taken. The thing that was aggravating on that is that there simply was no debate. You know, nobody came to the public hearings. No one said boo until the last minute, and then all of a sudden, oh, we got a big problem. So let's have a full debate on that. You know, let's get everybody there, and if there's an objection to the way it's done in Lancaster County, let's hear it, and let's have an open and honest debate about it. Then our favorite bill is kind of my career bills: eliminate responsibility of counties to pay HHS rent. I think we're now down to less than 45 counties that actually pay anything. There have been several bill amendments that say if you have less space or no space than you did back in 1983 when this unfunded mandate was put on the counties, then you don't have to pay. So services are being consolidated in the bigger counties, and it's just not fair that some counties are paying the entire tab for this office space, and it just needs to be eliminated. It's unfair and it's workable condition and just should go away. Number 4, we expect to be a little bit on the controversial side. I think most people are aware that there's a statute 23-120, subsection 3, subsection B, that allows counties to levy up to 5.2 cents for bonded indebtedness for paying for county buildings. This statute's been there forever. Lancaster County has used it in the past. We're almost down to zero, Dennis tells me, so we just want to have all our bonded indebtedness paid off on that. I think one more payment for our health department building, and we'll be at zero on that. I think everybody's aware that we have a bridge problem in the state of Nebraska. In Lancaster County alone, we have 20 structurally deficient bridges and 5 functionally obsolete bridges. We now have 12 bridges that are closed that's causing some problems. And while there is money that's coming from the state in the last couple of years, we think this would be a way to generate more money quicker to address the problem. It's going to take years and years and years to get back to where we need to be with the bridge problem. So we realize there's controversy on that, but we want to open the discussion. That rather than wait until later, it would be nice to see if we could get the money, we could leverage this with the state money, because there are matching funds that are required on all the state programs. This would be a way to get a number of projects going sooner. So we've thrown that one out there. On the other packet, I'll just mention a couple of things of my recap of the last session. So I think it's accurate. I checked with folks, but some new proposals that did not make it into our list. I think one that's worth looking at, since we do have rising prison populations, is to strengthen prisoner litigation statutes to discourage frivolous lawsuits. These things are becoming very numerous, and they can be very expensive. There's federal legislation on the books that would serve as an excellent model. I mean, you certainly don't want to deny access to the courts. It's a constitutional right. At the same time, when you get the same jailhouse lawyers filing frivolous lawsuit after frivolous lawsuit, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of taxpayer money, and something is going to need to be done with that, especially with our rising jail population. So I will close at that point and entertain any questions. And that's what I like to see. Thank you.
I do have a question. On the pushback on HHS paying rent, have you sent them a letter or requested that they pick up the tab themselves?
Oh yes, we've been at this for a number of years. If Commissioner Hudkins was here, he would tell you that when we had them housed in our old federal building, it was about was it $6 a square foot, and we're renting in Gold's Galleria, which is about $15 a square foot. We need a statute on that, because the existing statute clearly provides that the counties are supposed to pay for rent for HHS facilities as they existed on April 1, 1983. So it's not something they're going to just walk away from. I did meet with HHS officials about a year ago about this, and they would like to see it gone, quite frankly. The people that have to administer this and keep track of it think it's more of a nightmare and a headache than it's worth. But there's some old guard people that are still at the Capitol who object to this changing, but I think we just need to keep at it, because it really isn't unfair that half the counties pay rent and half do not, and it's supposed to be for the entire HHS system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarpy, do you want to go next?
I think Mayor was there when the negotiations happened to assume Medicaid from the counties, and he just.
I may have been short a couple of copies, but I did lay copies of our legislative proposals. And I apologize if anyone did not get one. But like Harry, I think the county's interested in property tax relief, and but we're very cognizant of the state budget issues as far as traditionally lots of times when they do a solution to the state budget crisis tends to rest upon the county government back. So we'll definitely be very cognizant of that discussion. I'm just going to highlight a few of these. The continuation of the records modernization fee collected by your Register of Deeds. Originally to get that bill out of committee, there was a 5-year sunset on there. Seems to be working quite well. The needs are still out there statewide. Senator Moorfield had a bill, 492, I believe, that ended up dying on the floor last year, but it was out of committee, and so we would like to remove that sunset. Green belts keeps coming up in Sarpy County, and I won't delve too much into that because that's an area of discussion for later on the agenda. But so we are working with assessors and others to take a look at clarifying what types of properties actually qualify for green belt and further delineating. We are aware that there are special niche markets, whether it be pecans or geranium seeds or some other things I've been advised on, but so we're looking at a formula to kind of create where just the guy who's throwing some turkeys on his property and maybe cutting a few trees is not running a logging operation. So we're also interested in amending county sales tax statutes, section 13, just to include a public infrastructure component on this. I want to emphasize that Sarpy County is not thinking about currently putting a sales tax question on the ballot, but looking at some of our ongoing needs with sanitary sewers and issues in the Platte Valley watershed and the Platte Valley Road corridor and stuff. We're just going to start the discussion to kind of look at it as a tool for the future county boards to consider if necessary. Several little cleanup ones. One I am throwing out there, we've had some rather long waits at the driver's testing office in our courthouse. Unfortunately, that's the first office you see when you walk into our courthouse, so when there are bodies there, Jimmy John's delivering lunch to people waiting in lines. Lunch is running anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, so I seem to spend a lot of time on social media correcting people that Sarpy County is really not an evil place and we aren't incompetent, but yet politely not suggesting the state is incompetent, but attempting to deflect the criticism. So, but we have had meetings with the governor's office and DMV. Very, very little progress. There was legislation passed last year to remove the county requirement from the driver's license component. So we're encouraging DMV to move out and create their own type of a service center. Still working through some of those issues. So, but whether it be the budget authority or any other legislative authority, we will definitely support those. I mentioned state budget deficits. We want to protect the juvenile community aid funding. Seems like every time there's justice reform, whether it be on the adult or the juvenile level, the county gets stuck holding the bill. And so we're going to attempt to monitor those discussions. Again, being cognizant of the fact that the state has very little money. Carrie alluded to whether it be the jail reimbursement program, state aid to counties. Every time they seem to seek a solution, it comes back to haunt us. So, the last thing I'm throwing out there, for those of you who were in York for the NACO Legislative Conference, Chief Justice Heavican raised the issue of the state takeover of clerks of the district court. It's been quite a few years since that was tried last. Frankly, with the state budget situation, I don't think a whole lot's going to happen, but we will monitor that if legislation is introduced. I think the very last version of that had a 10-year phase-in, which was making the county responsible for 100% of the budget, the first year 90%, et cetera, yet with the state taking the fees and the control. So we'll definitely, once and if a bill is introduced, address it on a basically a business decision. And I say the devil's in the details, so this will be one that will be probably pretty convoluted by the time it's drafted. So that's pretty much all Sarpy has. I do want to take any questions, or I like this.
Hi Fred, Diane Battiano, Douglas County Assessor Register of Deeds. I want to thank you for putting at the top of your list the Register of Deeds Technology and Preservation Fund. I would urge all the other counties, the 2 other counties in existence, it is not on the priority list for Douglas County. I'm assuming because NACO is taking the lead, but sometimes, as we all know, this is a very critical year. We either get it passed this year or we lose it because that sunset is lifted January 18th. So this is our last-ditch effort, and as well as NACO lobbies for that, sometimes it's not a one-man show, and I really think the importance of this to be carried on and the sunset lifted is crucial to every county in Nebraska, specifically Douglas, and speaking with our finance director, that the even split of the increased recording fees is split between the county general fund and the specific register of deeds offices to be used solely for technology and modernization. That funds pretty much all the technology projects for Douglas County in the general fund, separate and apart from what we spend in the register of deeds section for promotion of technology and modernization. We in Douglas County, we have quite a big pot both in the register of deeds and Joe has in Douglas County, which is being used ongoing. We're using probably 3/4 of our already collected, it took us 3 years to collect. 3/4 of that pot will go to our land records management system. So one project for Douglas County takes up like almost 3 years of collection of fees, not counting maintenance that goes on every year. So I would really urge all the lobbyists, all the county boards to band together and really promote and lobby for this sunset to be lifted. 2017 is our last opportunity.
Hey, Ms. Diane, was the real estate community, the realtors were supportive of that?
Yes, the
Yes.
realtors, the title companies, the Secretary of State, the bank, yes, they've all been involved and supportive. And I want to thank Larry for all what he's done, but I think we need to really heavy hit it this year.
And part of the issue, the bill's introduced in 15, I think the government committee was just a little bit slow in getting it out, and then it just died on the floor, so,
Right.
but pretty much all the players were on board, so.
So it's do or die this year.
Anything else? Thank you.
Douglas?
Good morning. I think everybody should have a copy of ours. It says it's red. It should be printed in draft at the very top. There should be 2 sides to it, front side, back side. So this is Douglas County. If not, I have a few extras if you need them. Okay.
Thank you.
Got it? All right. So starting out with some of ours, we have some standing shared support items. That's my first 3 listed there. And again, it kind of meshes with Lancaster's and Sarpy's. It's supporting criminal justice reform, watching the rising jail costs as a result of LB 605. We are definitely in the heat of that. Looking at that day to day with our jail, our population is very high, like 1330 right now, I believe. So we are looking at that. Number 2, again, it's eliminating unfunded, underfunded mandates. That's always a standing priority of ours. Number 3 on there is trying to share in the automotive sales tax revenue collected by the treasurers. We get a flat fee for a certain amount of the cars, and so it would be nice to share as a percentage in that revenue. So those are always our 3 standing items that we typically have on our agenda. The items below that, the 2017 legislative items, this is kind of a collection of all comments made by commissioners over the interim. So the board, again, because it's a draft, the board is going to review all of these items. Some will stay, most likely, maybe more will be added to it. But just to hit on some of the very important items that we do have listed. Number 1 on there, collection of 911 surcharges. This doesn't affect the other counties. This is just for metropolitan class. We collect less than the other counties in the state. We again would like to try and go after collecting the same fee as the other counties in the entire state. So that's one that does affect Douglas County. Number 1 there. Again, number 2, looking at Medicaid coverage, looking at individuals coming into our jail, whether or not their Medicaid is suspended or terminated. That's an issue we always like to look at. Senator Howard did have a bill 341 during the 104th on that. Number 3, fair board members serving at large. A small change to the statute. And I will go on to some of our other ones here. Now I'm back on the back side. Number 5, you may have seen before from us. It's asking the state again to contribute to TIF. Number 6, increasing the penalties of a crime of an assault on a correctional officer. We do have quite a few incidences at our jail, and I'm sure as all of you do in the larger jails. where correctional officers are being assaulted on a weekly basis or so. Number 7, this is our home rule ask. We continually have an item on that always asks if we can be granted home rule authority, especially for metropolitan class counties. That would give us some expanded or broadened ordinance authority. Number 8, our board believes that if there was a centralized facility for the distribution of license plates, that could be something the state could look at to be potentially save money and be more efficient. That's number 8. Number 9, this came to our attention kind of late in the year, and what this is proposing is kind of speeding up the process for tax foreclosure on a abandoned property, or like a warehouse that's abandoned and is deteriorating quickly. Minnesota recently passed a law that allowed the acceleration of that rather than waiting 3-4 years to let a place go continue to be deteriorated, and then the value would be much lower by the time it gets back into another private owner's hands. So that's number 9. Then number 10, over the interim, my board has had a lot of discussions about changes to BOE, what is their role in BOE. So a couple of those bullets under number 10, those are just kind of the ideas that were thrown out by our board further to be discussed. And again, one in particular is to perhaps hold Turk hearings in Omaha in addition to Lincoln. That could be helpful to property owners because there are so many that do come from Omaha. So that's just an example of maybe some of the changes that we could propose to change to Chapter 77. And Commissioner, that's what I have.
Any questions for Marco? Marco, is there anything right now that prohibits Turk from holding the hearings in Omaha?
I don't believe so. Sean and I talked about this, but I don't believe that that's the case.
Okay. Because
so
I mean,
if Turk
they
chose
hold
to
all
do
over
that,
the state.
And they used to, right? Like they used to. Okay.
We still have single commissioner hearings in Omaha.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there was a question up here.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
A couple, actually.
Okay.
Number 4, what's your rationale for that?
Number 4, I believe that this item, from what I understand, has been in the statutes for quite a long time, and they used to rotate candidate names. I want to say, was it a related literacy? Sean, do you know?
It's a fairness issue.
Oh, okay.
They rotate them, so your name is first
Right.
written down.
It just rotates the names throughout the ballot so that somebody's name isn't the first on all the ballots within the county. And what happens through that rotation is it adds a significant amount of cost to the programming and printing of the ballots. Many other states do not have that. And that's one of the things that drives up the cost of printing the ballots in the state.
And then on number, so it's a cost factor, I guess. I don't know if cost overrules fairness, but I don't think that one has much of a chance. I would say number 10. What's the thought behind the third bullet with the prohibiting the county assessors from appealing directly to Turk without BOE approval? I like that personally, but what's your thinking in Douglas County behind that?
We're seeing an increase in that happening, where the Board of Equalization will make a ruling, and then the county assessor is taking a lot this year to versus previous years to Turk, and so that's actually a cost factor too, and time factor, and human resource factor, and so we're saying something needs to change in that and Board of Equalization.
I think that's a great idea. But another thought I had too as a Board of Equalization member, and I don't know how the rest of the Sarpy County Board feels, but what bothers me a lot is when Board of Equalization makes a determination on a tax ruling, the next year, the ruling can be overturned by the assessor's office if they disagree. I would like to see some sort of statute that allows the ruling to be held in place for I'm not saying that the valuation needs to be kept. It should, if for instance, if the evaluations across the county go up 3%, then that ruling, that Board of Equalization ruling's property should also go up. But what I've been seeing in the past is if we make a determination to lower somebody's taxes significantly, the next year they're back in again in front of a referee because their taxes just went back to where they were before they won their protest. So I mean, it almost makes you feel as a Board of Equalization member that you're wasting your time. Because why rule on something if it can just unilaterally be overturned the very next year? So I'd like to see something that protects that ruling or gives it some shelf life at least, so that taxpayers feel like, you know, that their claims are being taken serious.
Don, we agree with you on that one. That happened quite a bit in the past. And if Commissioner Boyle was here, he would really be on a roll right now. But that's exactly, because we tracked quite a number of them that we were seeing sometimes in a cycle of 4 years. So you would lower it, the next year the assessor would raise it, we would lower it, the assessor would raise it, we would lower it, the assessor would, and it was a vicious circle. And it really was, in my opinion, unfair to the taxpayer. They went through the process correctly. The other issue that we're seeing though with that are some taxpayers are actually taking theirs to TURP, but the assessor then is also the next year's valuation going back to what was protested and what was changed and in TURP. So now you have sometimes, I have one in my district that there's, I think, 3 or 4 years that are tied up in TURP, but the assessor keeps raising the value back. So that we agree that's an issue too.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Marco? Larry, you want to do NACO?
Morning, everyone. I'll sort of update NACO's side of it, but surprisingly, a lot of things that the 3 counties have, those are also on NACO's list in some way, shape, or form. If it comes to funding of bridges, looking at additional ways for funding for signage on bridges, that's a couple of things. We're also looking at, right now, some of the money that's coming down for our bridges. When we had the county bridge match program come down, once that money comes down, that becomes a restricted fund in everyone's budget. And so then I look, to Dennis and Joe, sort of how those state funds hit and become a restricted fund. We're looking at seeing if we shouldn't remove those as restricted funds, if we can get that through. Now, that's going to be a good discussion at the legislative level, but those are dollars that we don't control. Those are not property tax dollars. Those are dollars that are coming down through highway allocation, that kinds of things. So the question is, should those really truly be restricted funds? We've met with the auditor, had a great discussion with him about that, and I think there's even some question at that level if those funds should be restricted funds. So we're gonna start to dig into that one. The issue of HHS paying for space, that's been on our list forever, just like everyone else's. There are some smaller ones that certainly are not going to impact some of these 3 counties. That's talking about the filing location of school district treasurer bonds, which that happens in rural areas. I don't think we really have that issue here. Parcel identification numbers on replatted parcels, that's one that impacts assessors. when we now have a law that says if I've gone out and I've created a subdivision and I've laid out 100 parcels, I can actually go to the assessor and say, I want that treated as like 10 parcels. And so I can package those back together. Well, what we've started to find around the state is some of those parcels now have unpaid taxes on them. And now when you package them back as one parcel, now you've got a problem because part of the parcel has an unpaid tax on it. So we've got to get a clarification that before you can repackage those lots back together, the back taxes are paid on it. There's some issue with renewable energy generation facilities, primarily wind turbines in the rural areas where we have wind farms. We've got to dig into a taxation issue on that. Once those wind farms, when they originally are created, the assessors have a pretty good handle on who owns those wind farms. But what we're seeing is now those wind farms, then the developer sells that to another entity, and they may sell it to a third entity. And by the time it gets diminished and sold to that third entity, the assessors really have no contacts left to figure out, okay, what's going on in that wind farm? What roads are being built out there? What concrete is being poured? Because through that nameplate capacity tax, the reporting of that now moves to the state. So the entity now is reporting to the state, but the assessor has to know what's going on. And so it's created a void. And again, I don't think there are any wind farms in the 3 counties that are here today. We know that we're going to go through some of the district court statutes. There's some outdated terminology there. I think it was mentioned about court consolidation. There right now is a study going on. The courts have hired a consultant, and he is, let's see, 2 weeks ago, he made a swing through the western part of the state. I think at the end of November, he's going to make a swing through the eastern part of the state and visit a number of county courts and clerks of district court. And then he will, my belief is, his goal is to issue a report prior to the end of the year to Chief Justice Heavican. And then that will sort of start that discussion. I know that Chief Justice Heavican has talked to a couple of senators about potentially introducing legislation, but until we really see what that looks like, I don't know. As of today, there's been no legislation drafted on that issue. So if it is introduced, it's probably going to be one that's sort of somewhat thrown together, and it's going to take a while, I believe, to work through that system. We'll also update some outdated jury terminology statutes. Of course, we've got the elimination of the sunset date on the Register of Deeds. That's on there. We've also, last year we'd introduced a bill, Senator Hart introduced a bill. I think some of the counties here are running into a situation where we have some of our taxpayers that apply for a homestead exemption, and they are granted a homestead exemption. Then once it goes to the state to review how much money they actually make to see if they meet the requirements of the homestead exemption, by the time the state will deny it and then notify the county. And we've got taxpayers that are getting caught in this situation where by the time they get the denial notice and they realize, oh, I've got taxes due, now they're delinquent. Now they're starting to pay interest on that. And we have no authority from the County Board of Equalization to be able to take a taxpayer and say, we understand why you got caught. It was because of the tax happening at the state level, the time it takes to review it, and they come back to the county boards wanting help, and the county board's hands are tied. And not that we're trying to get rid of any tax, but I think in some of those instances, the taxpayers are simply getting caught. And if we could, by any chance, have the local County Board of Equalization at least waive the interest. We know the person would still have to pay the tax, but they are sort of getting caught in that. So those are things that are on our list that we'll probably have bills introduced. Certainly we'll work with, I think Lancaster County is going to take the lead on HHS space, which all of us. Another one we're starting to look at is the valuation of what's called dark stores. As we start to see Walmarts and places like this that abandon their old buildings and build a new one. Then these abandoned buildings sit there, and all of a sudden, then they're wanting to compare their new valuation to the old abandoned dark store, the old abandoned building, to drive that valuation down. That's happening across the United States. That's a US problem. And then we've got another one to work on, not just weed funding in our riverbeds and our streams. Last year we were able to get $1 million so that every year we hope to have $1 million to spray those riverbeds to keep invasive species out. Given what we're looking at with this legislative session and the funding issues, we know that's going to be a challenge to hold on to that $1 million. The other thing is, we've got to keep an eye on any cash reserves at the state level that maybe the counties draw fund from or get any revenue from, because all of those cash reserves are going to be looked at in a session like this. We know the unfunded mandates issue is going to be at the forefront again, just because living through what we lived through previously when we had a downturn in the economy, we know where they look to go after the counties on state aid and jail reimbursement, things like that. So, any questions? PJ.
You mentioned the dark stores and then the ones that are occupied. I could be very helpful on that.
Great.
One day,
Yes.
testimony before
Yeah.
the legislative committee. The other thing we're seeing in Douglas County, just want to mention it, I'm certain others are seeing, we continually see our tax base being reduced by medical facilities. They buy a doctor's building at 89 Dodge or 156 or build it. Doctors move there after purchase, and that building is then off the tax rolls. Yet it's not really a charitable situation. In other states, Patrick knows this, they have what's known as a pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes, which hospitals share. The other thing you see is in Minnesota, for example, if a hospital has doctor's offices attached to that hospital, that part of it is taxed. And I think that's something that would be very challenging because of the strong lobbying efforts that would go into that. But it really has a dramatic effect. And I'll give you one quick example that's probably annoying for me to say, but HDR is being purchased by Children's Hospital, and I have a great deal of respect for all of our hospitals and what we're doing. But District 66 is somewhat of an island. That's not my district, but it's my community. And that suddenly all goes off the tax rolls. District 66 does not have any growth like Miller, OBS, and so on. So those effects are pretty dramatic. If you look at Dodge Street, you can see it on both sides. More property being purchased on a constant basis. I think that's something for the future that we need to start to focus on. And I appreciate hearing other counties are seeing that in Lancaster. We're a little bit concerned where that's taking place.
Well, I think it's going on. To a certain effect, Deb, you may have to help me in Lancaster County, but I know Brian East sort of took over a full block of residential houses and wiped out a full block of, and those were on the tax roll. Of course, they're no longer on. And that may be core hospital functions, but I don't know. I can't remember if there are doctor's offices going in there. Buffalo County has a situation in Kearney where Good Sam has started to actually not only take over residential, but actually some commercial properties out in the middle of Kearney. And very similar situation that you're looking at there.
And it may be something where we want to get a small group to start to look at that and talk about it and see what the steps might be with our lobbyists and others to at least see if down the road we can start to do something about it.
Right.
Mark Kraft, Douglas County. When I was on the Omaha City Council, I discussed the dark stores because it was happening a lot in California back then. And they were using the comparison, we can't lease this to anybody. Well, it was because of restrictions they put on the lease that they could not release it to anybody who competed with Walmart or Sam's or Costco. And so they refine their own market to limit the amount of use for that building. And I believe they were trying to institute that if you have a building over a certain size, you had to design it so that it could easily be divided to create alternate uses.
Yeah, I think that's happening. I know in Lincoln, the old Kmart store has been completely repurposed into 4 or 5 smaller stores. But surprisingly, even when I go around the state, I hear this, they're starting to talk about it, even in the rural areas, when there may have been a little Alco store out there that was really, really a small storefront, but then when they leave, then that building just sits empty, and then people are starting to use it as comparisons. So even on a smaller scale, not the Walmart scale, but a smaller scale in the rural communities. So as I looked around the United States, for the most part, I think there's only one state that has looked at legislation to handle it. Everyone else has looked at it more so from an educational point of view of trying to deal with it at a tax protest time, or at, in our instance, at a Turk level. And so we've been in communication with Turk, and at least giving them articles about what's going on in other states. And they're very aware of it. They hear it at their national meetings also.
Have you heard anything about community-based aid going 2018 going forward for criminal justice reform? I'm very concerned about the rug getting pulled out from under us in that regard.
And you're talking about the $500,000?
Now we get millions of dollars in grant funds for juvenile justice, alternatives to detention programs.
Right. I haven't heard anything specifically, but I've got to think in this year somebody's gonna bring it up. I just think they will. Chris?
It's being talked about. There's only one senator there that really had anything to do with it, and that's Chris.
And I caught him in the hallway the other day. Yeah.
So it's being talked about.
Yeah, I saw him in the hallway just last week, and I just jokingly said, "Hey, what are you thinking about?" And he said, "Well, you'll need to be at the table. You'll need to pay attention." Yeah, that's about all I say. Talk.
Well, just to follow up on that, a few weeks ago, Deb Shore and I had a meeting with Joe, with Senator Chris, talking about the funding issues. It was kind of at his urging, and we'll talk about it later today, about how we calculate our per diem. But I think they're looking at ways for ways to save dollars. They're looking at community aid, pot of money, and then the message we got was it's all about data.
Right.
And it's that apparently the governor and Senator Chris had a conversation, and it was all about data. That the counties have to demonstrate that the dollars that are being used are being put to good use, and there are outcomes that are quantifiable. So that's kind of how the conversation went.
And you're exactly right. It is all about data. Last year we had Senator Shoemaker introduce an interim study to start to look at data. We've been meeting with Senator Shoemaker over the interim, and in fact today I've got a 1 o'clock conference call that talks specifically about that. The data that they're looking at historically, counties we've never collected, we've never really collected in that fashion. So we're trying to figure out what exactly do we need to collect, and so that we can provide proof that this is where the money is going. And so it is really digging down into those data elements. We've met with about 10 different state agencies that sort of have input into that. So it's State Patrol, it's HHS, it's Corrections, it's Crime Commission, it's all of those entities that we've sort of put into this, that everybody sort of has a little bit of piece of it, and everybody's collecting data somewhat on their own, and there's not a lot of common data elements to tie them together. So we've clearly identified that. Senator Shoemaker and Senator Chris had a meeting last week talking about that specific thing. So we've been really talking about and working on that all summer long.
Larry, I just wanted to say, on the process, I just wanted to say though, I'm sure I can speak for
Joe and Sean and Mike and myself, but it's really good. You're very good with us when there's a reason y'all meet separately. Obviously, have different issues in some of the rural counties, but you've been very helpful helping us reach out to some of those more urban, more rural senators on the urban senator behalf. They get it, but out west sometimes it's like, they got all the money in the world, you don't need anything. You've been very good and appreciated. I think the board members should know what happens, but Larry can get us into some of these offices and kind of say, hey, this is everybody's problem, and this might be a great example of that, because I'm sure there's other counties. But anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because you have been helpful.
Yeah, thanks. And you know, so that everybody here in the room knows, you know, we've got a tremendous team of lobbyists, and there isn't really a day goes by once we're in the legislative session that all of us don't meet out in that rotunda and talk about county issues. And so that's part of that goal of working together on these issues. Deb?
In that we're losing Senator Campbell and her historic knowledge of county, we will be gaining Steve Erdman, so it'll be nice to have a former county commissioner serving in the State House. Do you want to address at all the impact of the new senators, the races that were supported by the governor, potential legislative leadership, any of those issues?
You know, when we go into the next session, we're going to have over half of our senators that have 2 years or less of experience, well over half. So we're beyond the tipping point. So the leadership roles are clearly going to be very, very important. When we look at it in county government, to give you an example, when I started this job in 2002, I remember asking a predecessor of mine, Jack Mills, saying, well, how do we get bills introduced? And he said, well, you don't worry about it because you've got 8 county board members that are in the legislature. You just take your bills over and somebody will introduce them. That isn't the case anymore. What we have now coming into the next session is we'll have Steve Erdman, will be a freshman senator. Steve has been a county board member for a number of years, has served on the NACO board, so he knows county government issues. The other one we have is Joni Jones Albright. Joni was a former Sarpy County board member, and so Joni will be a person that understands county government. And then the last person that has any tie to counties is Senator Shoemaker, who was a former county attorney. So that's sort of what we're dealing with. So that those tables have turned drastically. When we go through, you know, this upcoming year, you know, we've got our hands really going to be full just educating, getting the word out. I think right now Lancaster County has an event scheduled for the new senators to talk about county government issues. Douglas County, I think, is in the planning or has a date scheduled. I don't know if Sarpy County has scheduled anything specifically for your senators, but I think it's becoming, as we see more and more of the senators, well, virtually over half of the senators coming from these 3 counties, I think it's important that the counties sort of work with your own senators and invite them to an event so they understand county government, because that's really what we get into a lot of times, is the fundamental understanding of county government, that we're there to carry out those state statutes, and when those things pass, typically it becomes an unfunded mandate. So we got work cut out in the next few years just with the educational process, just going through that. Chris?
Larry, can I take one step back to the community-based aid office?
Yes.
Okay. I think we should know that, I think that question from the governor, is a kind of a straw man, meaning it's a question that the answer's already known. There's not a lot of data out there, probably 3 or 4 counties have data. They changed that law to start taking a certain percentage off the top. And anybody that's getting money from those programs now has to report that as a requirement up now. So they probably are getting 1 year of data. So any program, if you get money out of community-based aid and that money touches any of your programs, you got to report the results of all those programs up. So it's built into the system. I mean, the argument could be you got to give it time to be able to see what it actually is. And until some of the changes that they just made, a lot of those western counties weren't even putting community-based plans together. So some of those questions they already know the answer to it is already loaded. So so I'm just saying the argument may have to be different in some respects now. the crime commission may be a player in helping to do that, because they're just able to now see some of the benefits of this money coming to the system. And they may be from the western part of Allied to say, you gotta give it some time to be able to work.
Yeah, I think timing is a factor, and even last year, I think, Joe and Sean, all of us were talking to the senators about it, openly saying, what you're asking for, you're saying, well, prove it to us. Well, we can't prove it because we don't have the data. We've never been asked to collect the data on these programs. And so we don't have any systems in place. Why would we put a system in place to just sort of at will collect odd bits of random information until we really know why it's needed? Well, now we know, sort of based on what's passed in the legislation, what information they're asking for. So now we can put the systems together. And I think Douglas, Sarpy, and Lancaster County are well on their road to doing that. But I will tell you, once you get out into the rural parts of the state, that data is virtually non-existent. I mean, it just is anecdotal data that somebody says, here's what I think is happening, and that's it.
Can I ask one? I want to, it's PJ's question, which I think is a fair one, that at least I want to ask the lobby, particularly like Tim, since you chaired that committee. I guess how big a lift that pill piece would be with the hospitals, because this is the dynamic with that. I think some of them, at least locally, feel that, but the hook was that they would say that under the healthcare law, they're pressured under community-based aid to give a certain amount of money back. But now that the whole healthcare law is in question, I think this puts a different argument on, because the federal law made them have to give a certain amount of money back. If some of that gets repealed, I don't know where it goes, because in addition to the federal law, some states put their own addition onto that, and the hospitals have to give a certain amount back to that. So I guess I'm just asking, saying that, in case that's not an option, could a fallback be that for the community-based community benefit money, that may be an option to tighten that up a little bit, where they have to give it towards certain health issues that those counties may be dealing with, right?
And there are other states that either mandate a percentage of their revenue go towards the community initiatives in general, or what you're talking about, if there's an issue, so say for instance, mental health seems to be a huge issue across the state, that a percentage of their revenue be for mental health. So I don't know if there's any talk about that.
I haven't really heard too much about that. I think, we're somewhat at the forefront. I think now is the time where we have to start having these discussions, and we got to figure out what's the best way to facilitate that, because we are at the forefront. And as Chris said, who knows, what's going to change within the Affordable Care Act and some of those provisions. But I would rather us be involved in the discussion now than trying to react to it 3 or 4 years down the road, if we can impact it in that fashion. Tim?
Well, if the health committee is gonna look at it, it would be Senator Howard or Senator Reed running for health chairs, or at least there'll be a Metro senator that you can talk to and explain the situation.
I think that issue would probably go to the revenue committee as well. Getting anything out of there is always a challenge, we don't know. But I think it would be, to answer your question, Chris, I'd like to sell your time, but you have to start at some point.
Yeah, we have to start it, and once we know how it shakes out, who wins the leadership of that committee, then it might be at that point in time set up a meeting just sort of off the record with the head of that committee.
But Sean's right, it'd be both though. It's going to be a mess on the healthcare, let's face it.
Yeah.
So the health committee would then be talking to people on the revenue committee, which of course has Omaha senators as well. So I think you got a lot of data to go collect and bring to them.
And is this something you do to just send a shot across the box?
Yeah, bring it up. And then
Yeah, I think we start the discussion, but I think also it's not about the hospitals at this point. I think we start talking about those doctors' buildings where we know they're not operating as a charitable facility without question. Their practice and everything is exactly the same. And and I've been watching this, or if they buy the land and aren't even sure what they're gonna do with it, it's off the tax rolls on the 87th or whatever, on the north side. So I think we start that discussion, and I'd like to be a participant if we move toward that.
I think if you look historically, I mean, I could go back to the beginning of the time that I started on the board, that there has always been conversation at some place in the legislature about tax exemptions on hospitals. This doctor building issue that Mr. Morgan brings up, that's a newer one, but historically it kind of goes in waves. There's a big push for the conversation to happen at the legislature about a hospital tax exemption in general, and then it kind of goes away. And then it'll come back a few years later and maybe be a little bit more robust, not so robust, but then it goes away. Now, it's been fairly quiet for a number of years on that issue, but we have, if you remember at some of the Tri-County retreats, have brought up the PILT issue a couple of times. And so I think as we start seeing this continuation of a shift to state trying to balance their budget on the backs of the counties, I think counties need to start pushing back and have those more robust conversations about PILT, about tax exemption at our level and with our senators.
Just real quickly, the largest property owner in Lancaster County is Bryan Hospital, who's nonprofit, so they pay no taxes. We did get a hold of their tax returns, that must have been 12 years ago. They had about $37 to $38 million of nonprofit that year. The only difference between a nonprofit and a profit hospital is you cannot have shareholders when you're a nonprofit, so the money either goes to staff salaries or property. That's basically the only difference.
Comments. Would it necessarily have to be a statutory change rather than a county board change when the assessor's office does their revaluation and their research on exempt properties, medical, for example, the hospitals? If we have confirmation that they are predominantly profit bearing because they're doctor's offices, couldn't that rely on the county board's decision rather than have to have a statute change?
I believe it can if the assessor places a value on that building.
And
that triggers the notice of valuation. Then that person has the ability to come into the Board of Equalization and protest it, and then it goes right on through the system. Probably 8 or 9 years ago, Buffalo County sort of started to go down that path on Good Samaritan. But then I think it ended up getting negotiated out at the Board of Equalization process. But there was some information in the papers.
Because I think society emotions sometimes get in the way, that if you have enough data that justifies, the decision on that. That was just my question. I don't know if it would actually need a statute change.
Well, I don't necessarily know that you would. I think you have to go through the process. And in my belief, I don't know that we've had a Turk case that has ruled on that as of yet. So I don't think we have any historical cases to go back to.
Well, we kind of do that now in a way. I mean, if you, like, hospitals will have their tax exempt properties, and then they will also have their taxable. So say, for instance, the wellness center issue that came about. So the assessor will look at, with the hospital personnel, their buildings, their structures, and then that conversation happens at that level, and then we as the Board of Equalization will either agree or not agree with the assessor's finding on those things. So this may be just expanding it a little bit to the quote doctor's buildings that are out there, but that kind of does take place now, because not all properties that the hospital owns are tax exempt.
And we require a question, especially on full exemption years, every 4 years, we always have that a lot, like a very intensive questionnaire that goes to any existing or newly possibly exempt property. And so we have a good idea of what is being used for.
What the use of that
just through the questionnaire,
Sure.
depending on their level of of interest.
Okay. All right, thank you.
We'll go ahead and get started a little bit on this next section, and then we'll take a short break. But the next section is the mental health criminal justice reform. And the first item is the detox civil protective custody. And I know Lancaster asked that this be put on as a separate item, but just in short, Douglas County, we had those services provided by Catholic Charities through the Region 6 contract, and Catholic Charities had chose not to continue those services, and so Region 6 went out for an RFP on that, and so the transition is occurring hopefully January 1, that will all be taken care of. So, and that will be actually provided through our Douglas County Mental Health Community Center. So we are still going to provide those through a contract through the Region 6 entity. So Carrie, do you know who wanted to talk about it at Lancaster?
Well, yeah, we just thought we could be on something relevant to all counties. In Lancaster County, we have an agreement involving Bryan Hospital, our crisis center, and Region 5, and Cornhusker Place, which is where you get your civil protective custody issues. For each patient that's picked up, usually by the police, they do a triage, try to determine what is the level of severity of the case. Is it truly is it an emergency protective custody? Is it more of a maybe an alcohol or drug issue? Is it more civil protective? And we try to keep them out of Bryan Hospital, which is the absolute highest cost per patient. And agreement's been in place for a number of years, and it helped reduce our 15-bed population at the crisis center quite substantially and cover our costs down.
Well, piggybacking on that one is the need. Region 6 is actually looking for the need for a psychiatric emergency room, and that would, we think, help alleviate some of the bed problem and the emergency room problem that we're seeing, where people are either showing up on their own at those at the emergency rooms, or they're being taken there. And what happens is when you go to an emergency room, you're not really getting treatment. You're just kind of waiting for that next step to be put into a quote bed. And so you're not really getting any treatment. What we were looking at, and we've actually gone and looked at a couple models, but the one that we like is a facility where it's the door that everybody enters for whatever reason for their mental health issues. So you come in there and you go through a very quick assessment, and within that first 15-30 minutes you are sitting down with a psychiatric team, which includes a psychiatrist, that will put together your treatment plan. That facility is still only a 2359 facility, which means you have to be in and out within 23 hours and 59 minutes. But the difference is you're not just sitting and waiting for your placement in an ER facility, you're actually sitting in a facility where the treatment plan is being crafted by the mental health professionals as you are sitting right there. So it's a quicker, it's a more intense, and a lot more people involved in where your next step should be. So even if it is your next step going into a bed, that treatment plan is all laid out. If it's going into intensive outpatient, that treatment plan is all laid out. If you're just gonna go outpatient period, it's all laid out for you before you leave that facility. And so we're hoping that even those emergency protective custody ones, those that are, as you know, all counties are facing individuals with mental health being picked up by police and brought to our jails. This facility, we believe, will help alleviate those placements going to jail. Even if someone is picked up and charged, they can still come to that facility and the mental health problem is taken care of, and they may have to go on to the jail after that. That again, they're not going into the jail with an escalated mental health issue upon entering. So we are looking at that. Now again, as we talked here earlier, the funding situation that the state's in, you know, we don't know where that's gonna lead us, so it may put us behind a little bit on that. But we're still moving forward with at least trying to put together the business plan to make the initial ask to the community that this would be a good place to move for Region 6.
I attended the meeting that was kind of rolled out, and I might have misunderstood something, so correct me if I'm wrong. And there's still opportunities, even if what I'm about to say doesn't work. It's my understanding that people that were in police custody, the model that you saw, you couldn't bring them into the facility. Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, they can be for their initial assessment, but a guard would have to, or someone would have to stay there. Right. But that, again, is all within the planning stages of how many would we see, do we have to change that? But the initial thought is that they be brought there to have that assessment done before they go to jail.
Well, so I serve on Region 5 governing board, and so I think a number of us brought this up and wanted to discuss it further because I guess Douglas County and Lancaster kind of going in two different directions. And that's, so what we were looking at Region 5 is the lack of acute and subacute care after the correctional center. And the only alternative was the Lincoln Correctional, or the Lincoln Regional Center, which is full. So what we're having to do as a region is having to send some of the long-term patients out to Mary Lanning or even further out to Kearney, to Young. And that's causing, significant challenges. And that's because we don't have any acute or subacute facilities in Lincoln or Lancaster. We could bring Omaha, but we can't do run into the same issue.
Because you use the Lincoln for your inpatient, right? The regional center for your inpatient.
Only for beds.
Right.
And so, and there aren't very many. There's certain priorities that they set up, and so a lot of times they're full. Mm-hmm. And so, the alternative is to send them to HC Kearney or Omaha. And so that's where looking at providers who are willing to do what you said is to step up, because and we talked about it at the region many times. The barrier is money. Right. These facilities don't see this as a moneymaker, and so how do we incentivize it?
Right. And that's in Region 6, we're not necessarily looking at the lack of beds, but it's the utilization of how we use those beds. And so the more in-depth assessment or treatment that you can get started, I mean, people who sit in the emergency rooms, you can bet that if they're there for 2-3 days, they're really not in crisis to have to go into an inpatient bed any longer. But the question then is, where do they go? Now, if you go back, when we did behavioral health reform, it never really finished because the capacity within each of our regions wasn't built to take on the population that was coming back to our communities. So you're right, that's where we're stuck. We're kind of stuck with, okay, we know what we need, but we don't have the dollars to do it at this point, so how do you prioritize which service basically do you ramp up to make a trickle effect for the other ones? So that's what we're seeing, at least talking with, and I would encourage you guys to have a conversation with Dr. Zellers from Alameda, California. He actually is an expert in this, and they see that being able to ramp up their mental health psychiatric facility services actually had a direct impact on those that went to their beds and they didn't have a bed problem anymore. So that, again, it's all what resources you have and what capacity you have built up within your own communities. Sarpi, do you have anything else you want to talk about? The next one is the need for alternative to housing the mentally ill in county jails. In Douglas County, we're involved in the National Association of Counties initiative, the Stepping Up initiative. And we have a team that's put together that we're looking at and working in coordination with our Behavioral Health Authority Region 6 and how do we address these and how do we come up with alternatives for them going into jail. You know, when I can remember this conversation well over 8 years ago with our directors, and they always talked about how they didn't want to have all of the services in the jail for the mentally ill because that's where they would end up going. You know, people would just bring them to the jails. Well, without having those services, we were seeing that anyway. So it's just there, you know, it's happening. And so now we're talking about, okay, until we're able to keep the people out of the jails, what alternatives do we need to build up on that end? But while they're in jail, our board has actually increased the number of mental health providers and resources that we have within our jail to help out the jail staff, because that's where they're ending up going. But the Stepping Up initiative basically has a template of 6 questions basically that you follow, and you build your plan on how to address those. And so we're currently doing that with a team in Douglas County. So it's an ongoing, I see the long term. I think, Todd, you were talking about the long term. What we're seeing is people who need mental health issues longer than the acute, subacute days. We have the one facility, the telecare facility, where folks can stay 21, sometimes up to 2 years. But we need a facility where there's even something longer than that. And that's where those one-on-one plans, which are very expensive because the state doesn't want them in the Lincoln Regional Facility, the Norfolk for sex offenders. But what they're doing is doing one-on-one plans, and they're very expensive. I mean, Brenda, we've seen, what, 5 of them within Region 6 maybe, that we really have to sit down with the team of experts, and we have to wrap services around them to be here in the community, but that's very expensive. So even the long-term beds that you need for that longer term than subacute and acute, or acute and subacute, are still lacking within the state. There was talk during behavioral health reform where nursing homes, because there was a lot of empty nursing home facilities that had a wing or something, that we could maybe convert some of those for the longer term, and that just never went anywhere. Again, Todd kind of hit it, it's all about the dollars. People don't get into behavioral health services to make money. And so we're lucky, and I think you all too, very lucky that we have providers that are stepping up and really doing a lot around this arena in mental health, but we still have a lot that is lacking as well, and a lot of it is because of the financial resources and reimbursement rates that are just not there to make it work for them. And so we are constantly banging our heads trying to find what those alternatives are, from putting them in a bed or having them taken to our jails. And I know Sarpy is seeing the increase in mental health in their jails now. Patrick?
Well, there's kind of a fine line between getting the word out respectfully and putting thoughts in people's heads before they actually get there. But I think it is going to be incumbent upon us to kind of promote some of our things like Region 6, the mental health care, the community-based aid, in anticipation of what may happen. And thankfully we have Baez here from the World Herald as our new public information officer. Really the first full-time PIO that Douglas County has had. And I think it's going to be really important that we do some kind of outreach to the media and to the public about what not only why it's important, but how it does have a positive economic impact in terms of keeping people out of the adult jail, out of the juvenile.
2 things that Douglas County has had preliminary conversations, which are interesting to say the least, but with the Brain Injury Association, because a lot of times people are coming in with brain injuries and they're being treated for mental illness, but it's really a brain injury that they have. And so the director from the Brain Injury Association would like Lancaster and Sarpy and Douglas to actually start a pilot to do some screening of folks to see if maybe that's one of the issues. And again, we have to come up with alternatives to what, if it is a brain injury, what do you do? And then the second is we've talked about looking at establishing a pilot for long-term injectable mental health meds. And so what that would do is you take a population, and again, you'd have to look at the population in which you're serving, and we have kind of a pyramid that we look at, and you look at those high utilizers, and we're saying maybe if we gave them long-term injectables, because one of the problems when they leave the jail is them following up with their appointments and then again having access to getting to their appointments. But if you give them the long-term injectables, we are pretty convinced that we would see a reduction in the recidivism of folks cycling back through the jail. One of the issues that you have to come up with, though, is long-term injectables are a little bit more expensive, and so how do you pay for that on the front end versus the back end? And we're, again, convinced that if we did a pilot to show this, we would see that your money was actually being spent a lot better on that front end and the back end. So those are two alternatives that we're actually looking at to see about keeping them out of the jail, or once they leave the jail, making sure that they don't come back. Any other ones on that? And then lastly, just the discussion of the increased corrections population and the causes. Our female population has skyrocketed to where we have, for the first time, had 3 mods of females open, and the majority of those are in for assault issues, DV issues, or drug and alcohol issues, but mostly drugs. And so, again, we're seeing that staying pretty steady on an incline. That incline, I guess, is staying steady at having 3 mods open. I don't know if you are all seeing similar with the female population, but ours is the female population for those issues, and then the male population with the mental health issues. I don't know if you guys get what.
I think, we've had a significant increase in our female population as well. Most of that is, I think, due to drug issues, methamphetamine, prescription drugs that they don't have prescriptions for. We've noticed that the females don't seem to bond out as easily as the males do. I don't know what the cause of that is, if it's a financial thing or if they just don't have as much support or whatever, but they tend to stay in a little bit longer. And we too, over the summer, had to open up our pod to try and in order to house those females. And that pod's intended to be a male unit, so it's a 64-bed unit that I'm putting 20 females in. Then I have to staff that, one on 20 individuals, becomes really expensive. Plus, it restricts my male population as well. So it's really an issue that we did not foresee when we built this jail, that our female population. On the male side, I think we've identified our felony incarceration rate has increased quite dramatically, and our length of stay has increased, although it's only a little over a day on average. We're trying to tease out maybe what's causing some of that. I think the felons are staying in longer, because our misdemeanors, I think, have gone down. So I think the misdemeanors may be holding that length of stay down. I'm trying to look at finding a way to see what the length of stay over time has been for our felons. I think they're going to be drastically higher. The county attorney reports that they've had more cases, felony issues, assaults, some drug stuff. But AB 605 under the community sanctions on the line. I think we're behind us in that. Douglas is dealing with that as much. But we've had 45 or 50 different individuals come through the jail and community sanctions. And that, you know, we haven't even started with the post-release sanctions yet. So, yeah, it's really hard to kind of pinpoint what's causing that right now. People like, you know, like Larry said, we weren't set up to track those kind of stats. It just kind of landed on us, and now we got to go back and try and pull some of that stuff out.
We're working with UNO to help us with those data sets that will actually prove some of that stuff, but it takes time to do that and resources to do that. And we weren't given, when 605 was passed, counties weren't given any resources in data setup, in data collection or ongoing costs for that data. So we're facing that too. But again, that's what's important, is you have to have the data. We can go down as counties and, you know, talk about what our issues are, but unless you have the data to back it, the senators are really, it's not that they're not listening, but your case is made a lot stronger if you have the data to back up what you're saying.
I think with the mental health issue, I was going to make a comment about that. When you talked about bringing the sources into jail, one of our biggest issues is they won't accept the resources. They won't take the medication. They refuse to take the medication. We can't force them to do that, so they tend to deteriorate.
Do you have peer specialists in your jail?
We have mental health practitioners, and we have a psychiatrist.
We have been using peer specialists that seems to be actually most helpful when someone is in a crisis, that they are able to come in and have a conversation with them to get them compliant to do that. And then of course, you know, you don't want to, but you can always have a court order mandating the meds to be given and taken. Easier said than done.
Our county attorney says that we can't do that. It's the law, statute.
Luckily, we haven't had to go there, but our issues seem to arise more frequently when they leave, and then being able to stay on that treatment plan or get to their next appointments to continue that treatment plan once they're out. That doesn't seem, and we just had a conversation with our homeless shelter, because what we were seeing is we're basically serving the same people in different capacities that are again cycling back and forth through their facility, and they're arrested for some reason, or they're banned from the facility and then get in trouble and brought back to the jail. So we're trying to figure out how we can have a more collaborative relationship with our shelters, to see what we can come up with together on that. The Attorney General, when you talked about the prescription drug, Commissioner Rogers and I for many years heard counties across the country talk about the opioid and heroin issue that they were facing, and it was always on the East and West Coast. We haven't really, it hasn't arrived here, if you will, in full force, although it's kind of here. It's starting to bleed into us. Wisconsin Attorney General spoke at a conference that our Attorney General put on, and he was phenomenal. And they have a huge issue in Wisconsin with opioid abuse and heroin. And he feels that if Nebraska was able to put some resources in now on building awareness and prevention, that we won't go to the crisis that other counties and communities are seeing. But it was an interesting, there was a fellow from the DEA who talked about how opioids started it, but they get very expensive and hard to get. And the increase in production of heroin and the pure form of heroin that's making it up through I-80 into our communities is actually easier to obtain and has a greater high, I guess, and longer lasting high than some of the opioids, so people are moving towards that. So I have asked our Attorney General to, if he would come to our board and do a presentation, but it may be something that we want to do as a tri-county, have him come and talk to all of us, because I'm sure you all are seeing that in your jails as well, the increase in charges on those issues. So if we can get ahead of this, rather than wait until it's in full crisis, you know, we may be able to nip one in the bottom before it gets too bad.
Even if we went to the state, all of us with the Attorney General, it could be a good thing.
Yep, absolutely.
Go to Lincoln and set it up for a certain time.
Yep. Yep. Any other issues on the mental health?
I want to talk just for a quick moment about something that was said about B605 tracking the data. We're at about 400 bed days, just on the sanctions in Sarpy County at this point in time. I don't know if you do the math on that, it's about $65 a day. We're paying elsewhere to ship them out. That's money.
Mike, you want to come up here?
Sure. We've had about 400 bed days on the sanctions, but what I want to say about the LB 605 and the data, first of all, this personal opinion doesn't represent Sarpy County's opinion, but the county or the state ought to be providing that data to us. They're the holders of that data in more ways than us through NCGIS and some other databases. They're the ones that should be providing it to us, but they're not. So we'll try to make it happen. But even when you get to the point where you figure out how you're going to get this data, you're not going to have empirical data. You're still going to have anecdotal data, and I'll tell you why. Because the judges still have a decision they can make, and there's prosecutors' decisions they can make on how they charge, what they charge. And at sentencing, judges can make a decision, or am I going to send this class 4 to the prison, or am I going to send this class 4 to a county jail? How are you ever going to get in the mind of the judge on whether or not he tracked it, or he sentenced under an LB 605, or he just said, no, I'm going to ignore LB 605, and I'm just going to send him for county jail time. So you're never going to have empirical data. Don't kid yourself for a minute. But I feel very strongly the state should be providing more help, and I go to a lot of meetings with that group on the tracking of the data. So we'll see where that goes. And real quick, I'll just bring you up to date because it's the same story. Sarpy County, we just finished a needs assessment with Mark Martin, so our data is very good at this point in time because we're considering what we're going to do in the future for our jail. We have a 148 bed jail that was built 1980, I can't remember, 87, 86, somewhere in there. Has been nothing added on to it since then. We're still 148 beds. So functional capacity, you're probably talking about 126 or so, maybe, in there. Today, I looked before I came here, we're at 143 today, so we got no room to classify properly. We don't have a pod to open up. I wish we did, but we don't. Average length of stay is our big issue. Our arrests in Sarpy County have trended down for the last 8 years. Our bookings in our jail have trended down for the last several years. Filings in the court have trended down. Everything you would think that would indicate that your jail population should be going down is down, except the length of stay. And our length of stay has increased tremendously. It's up to about almost 17 days right now. And when you consider out of 148 or 143, I didn't get this number, but it'll be pretty close. Probably less than 20 of those people, maybe 25, are sentenced. Everybody else is waiting to get through the process. That doesn't count almost 200 other folks that we have on a pretrial release program. So the people that are in our facility are there kind of in limbo because they can't make bail, they don't want to make bail, you know, whatever the reason might be. But the driving force for us is definitely average length of stay.
we are about to go down a path that we've never gone down before, maybe some of you folks have. We're gonna do a complete study of the system from point of arrest to point of sentencing and see if there's any efficiencies there we can pick up, that some of these people don't even come into our facility to begin with. So Mark Martin's gonna assist us with that as well.
Do you guys do the 24/7 or SCRAM program yet for community correction?
No, most of those folks that you have on your 24/7 are pretrial release. The ones that wouldn't be are the felony DUIs. Yeah, very, very aggressive pretrial release. If we didn't have a pretrial release, our population would probably be in excess of 300. Mark Martin's needs assessment said we need to add 270 beds, roughly bringing us up into the 420 to 450 range for the next 25 years. Plus, we don't have a special management unit. We didn't talk about mental health. Plus, we need a special management unit for mental health and behavioral issues.
Our community corrections programs have actually saved a lot of what we thought for a long time, because our population in our jail was actually below 1,000 for a good period of time, but now we're back up, and I think the last number was like 1,386 or something, and that's the highest it's been in about 20 years. And so even though we have great community corrections program, we are too facing with a longer length of stays, that increase in the jail population at the same time. But again, we're actually faced with many of the mental health issues in the jail. Anybody else? Commissioner Kraft?
Yes. Number one, you mentioned possibly having us get together for the Attorney General to talk about it. We can do that without traveling to every city by using conference rooms and the audio-video systems in the universities. Save all of us a lot of time, get more of the community involved. I think that'd be a very effective use of his time and our time. Two, as far as mental health goes, if you don't fund it, it's not going to happen. We used to have 5 psychiatrists on staff. Now we have 4. We service about 1,400 people a month in our outpatient mental health. We could be servicing twice that many. As far as bail or bond, posted bond, how many people are in there because they can't post a $50 bond? They have mental illness, and friends, relatives, nobody wants them around. So for $93 or $95 a day, plus medication, they're housing them because they cannot post a $50 bond on a disturbing the peace charge. Because as Mike Boyle used as an example, somebody who tried to use an expired coupon and he couldn't understand, so he was creating a scene at a restaurant, and he got arrested for disturbing the peace. I believe he owed the restaurant $7. Nobody responded. So we need to look at alternatives and ways of solving issues like that, which are very complex.
Anybody else? Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and continue with juvenile detention.
Joe, so if they get rid of this community-based aid, they'll keep all the programs, so that's what we gotta do, right? Just no money.
Right.
Yeah, we gotta make sure that doesn't happen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, our next issue that we would like to talk about is our juvenile detention per diem.
Disclosure forms.
And who put this
That's
on?
your wife.
You did? Okay, and
Computer.
Carrie, one of two things, if when you speak, if you could come to the podium, or just tell me, if you're like back there, I'll bring you the mic, because as they're changing out back there, people are having a hard time hearing back there, so we'll use the microphone a little bit more now. Do you want me to just give it to you? Yes.
Lancaster County put this item on, a little bit of a follow-up to the meeting with Senator Chris that Todd had mentioned earlier. We were chastised quite roundly because our per diem is the highest in the state. And in fact, he said it was probably $100 higher than Douglas County's per diem. So we feel that we are including all our costs, and so we started looking at this more carefully, and did I think Shelley Schindler did call Brett Alexander to see what the differences were between what's being included in our per diem and in Douglas County. What we found was a few things that would be obvious. So, we do have a lower staff to youth ratio, so we're and I think 2 is all the difference there. But where the real big difference is in the per diems is that we include all our direct costs and we include depreciation in our per diem. There's costs that are attributable here, and we figure they need to be in the cost center where they're being spent. So when you're talking about indirect costs, you're talking about things like workers' compensation, you're talking about personnel costs, attorney costs, information service costs, a lot of these components. We also have a rent component in our per diem, where our county property management determines what is the cost of operating all the properties in the county, and that's going to be divvied back to whichever department it is. So they're actually paying rent. It's like we're paying rent to ourselves, but we're getting the cost into the cost center. And also we have depreciation, which is an actual cost that goes into there. So for last year, or the budget year that we're in, we determined that if you add in all of those costs, our per diem is about $307 a day. I think Douglas County is some 220, 225, I think, in that range. We feel this is important for several reasons. Number one, if you don't have all your costs in your per diem, then the costs that the state should be paying for post-adjudication care are being shifted to your property taxpayers, pure and simple. In our case for last year, we figured that was about $31 a day. By Shelley Schindler's calculations, then from what the state is paying us, which is $276 to the 307, it's about $31 a day. That's over $400,000 of additional costs that is being paid by the property taxpayers. It also gives a false impression to the state about what is the true cost of incarceration. They don't have as much of an incentive to go towards the community-based programs, which some anecdotal, but we do have a lot of data on this. There's no question community-based services in the juvenile area are cheaper and more effective. If you're not including all your costs in your per diem, then you're skewing that. You're giving the impression that it's not quite as expensive to keep the kids incarcerated as it really is. So we feel it's very important, get all those costs in there. This is what's being paid, whether it's the county paying it or the state paying it or a combination of county and state paying it. This is what it actually costs. So it's important to know that, especially when you're looking at the alternatives, and especially when the state just doesn't seem to be funding those alternatives. And if we can let them continue to shift a big portion of the costs for keeping the youth in custody, then they're not going to have the same incentive to look at that. I think we've probably gone over this before. When we built our new youth services center in the 1990s, we had several consultants. One was Earl Dunlop, who was kind of the father of JDI. He was one of the first persons to come up with this concept of community-based is better than incarcerating pre-adjudication and then shipping off to out-of-home placements afterwards. And a woman named Karen Chin told us unless we get our community-based programs in place, graduated sanctions, bracelet programs, and a whole slew of other programs, that we're going to have that facility filled up in 10 years. At the time we built it, we had about 45 kids that were pre-adjudication. Today's count, we have 3. And it's directly attributable to that. It needs to move on to the next level. And one of the ways we can do that is to capture all the costs in the per diem.
Carrie, so are you saying you don't do that right now, or you do that right now?
we do that, and we've done that for a long time. We have an indirect cost study that's done by a company called Maximus, which we needed when we had Lancaster Manor and others. So we know what the indirect costs are. We know what the share of the county attorney, with information services, all these other expenses. So we put that in there. Now we don't collect it because the state simply refuses to say they say, well, that's too high. So, well, that's what it costs. Well, it's too high, we're not paying it. So for the difference between what it costs us and what we're being paid now, we're losing $31 a day.
Deb?
I could just follow up. When we met with Senator Chris, one of the things that I hadn't heard before were the possibility of closing the youth treatment centers in York and Geneva and rehousing those youth closer in their home community. So I think it's particularly important that we have an accurate representation of what a per diem is, because the state could be possibly reimbursing us to house those kids back in local facilities. So if we don't have a handle on what those costs are now, we'll have no chance of getting an accurate reimbursement when they close those facilities and move those kids.
So that's why we would encourage everyone to look at those costs, look at the true cost of what it is, just so that information is available.
And I do have concern about that conversation that you just mentioned, Deb, because my head starts spinning about mental health reform. You know, how the state wanted to remove the individuals from their cost through regional centers and put them back in our communities, and that's kind of really the same thing that they're doing with the juvenile centers in Hastings and Geneva.
Well, your point, Mary Ann, during that conversation, sorry. I guess to follow up on your point, during that conversation that we had with Senator Chris, he actually made a reference to designing a regional system for juvenile justice, which, knowing what we know about the region systems for behavioral and developmental disabilities, I don't know if that model, that is something that we should obviously pay close attention to moving forward. And that's why we did want to put the per diem on here, is so that when we go into these conversations that we actually are talking about apples to apples and not apples to oranges.
Right? I think I know what you're going to say.
Right, I need one. Yeah, in Sarpy County, similar to Lancaster County, we use the same firm, Maximus. Our population has gone down to about 6, where we were well up into the 20s, but our staffing has not gone down accordingly. And so the rate that Maximus computed for us, including all of our indirect costs, is actually about $639. Also similar to Lancaster County, we can not get state probation to pay us that much, and we're currently billing probation about $256 a day. So we're a little bit below Lancaster County, but now that we know Lancaster County is getting 277, 76, we'll shoot for that too. But the money that we are getting from probation has really increased over the last couple of years, since 561 and 644 passed. And in the first quarter of this year, we got $309,000 from them. And so that's much higher than what we were getting when we were, HHS was responsible for paying us. So that's kind of where we're at.
And we've actually, oh, Patrick, go ahead.
I was going to say, so if they close...
Can you stand up or come up here, because it's hard for people to hear.
I'll talk about it. So if they close these 2 centers and then they reimburse us, like they did with jail reimbursement, so then a few years later, then we're going to be stuck with the whole bill, right?
Pretty much.
That's something to look at.
Yeah, Joe?
One of the things too.
Can you stand up?
Oh, sure. Patrick, I think that's a great point, and I think if you go back and you look at the history of behavioral health reform, one of the things that they were very conscious of doing was we're going to shift the dollars from the 2 facilities in Hastings and Norfolk, and we're going to send that back out in community aid. it's important to note that I think roughly the number is 67. The number was about, I think it hit about 72 million in dollars that were moving out of those two facilities, and in total aid that came back to community-based programming. It's important to note a couple of things. One, that has been cut over the years systematically in aid back to those behavioral health needs. And second, that there has been no increase ever in those dollars. So we can expect that if they do go in that direction of closing down those two facilities, we'll just give you the lump sums and we'll send them out there. But guess what's always on the table every year? Cuts. Well, is there a better way to do this? So to your point, that's all I could think about when I was sitting here listening to it, is we should be on guard for what that might look like.
And to just add one more thing, I would caution every commissioner to be paying very close attention to, on the regional level, this is for the behavioral health now, not juvenile, but I need to say this because I forgot last time. We had Brenda and I, Brenda sits on the Region 6 board with me, and we had a visit from the director of Behavioral Health Division. And she had been having conversations with the regional program administrators about these cuts that were being requested of each department within state government per the governor. Well, it started out that the request was come up with a 10% decrease in your budgets, and you know, the governor's asking for everybody to do this. Well, then it came back and it was like, well, why don't you tweak it a little bit and let's see what 8 looks like. And I was like, okay. At the same time, I'm hearing some conversations from the sheriffs who they're being kind of, at their association, having conversations, and it's a different number. Well, the director then says, well, let's look at a 3% and see what we get. Well, it came down to the fact that it really wasn't at the, quote, request of the governor for regional program administrators to do this exercise. It was the state director of Behavioral Health Division asking the regional program administrators to do it because she had 3 things she wants to get in her budget that done, and she knows with budget cuts and the condition of the budget, the state budget's in, that she can't go ask for any money, any new money. So she was actually going to use, and probably still will try, to use regional dollars to be put back, cut from the regional budgets, put back in her budget so that she can do these 3 initiatives. And our director said, you know, how is that going to benefit Region 6, what you want to do? How is that going to benefit Region 5 and the rest of the regions? And so I would caution all of you just to be very alert at these cuts because it starts getting pretty dicey, as we all know. But again, that shift, I think we're going to start seeing more and more of this year.
Well, to add on to that, what's been happening the last few years is the reallocation through the regions. The other regions throughout the state are not utilizing the dollars the way that Region 5 and Region 6 are. And so the money that gets returned to the state, which seems, you know, counterintuitive, when they reallocate that money again, they reallocate it on the same formula that they did originally. So you have regions who are being reallocated money that they already turned back because they didn't utilize it. And so then what happens then is at the end of the year, you have several $1 million sitting there, whereas Region 5 and Region 6 are fully utilizing every dollar. I mean, every program unit of service has been bought, but what's happening is you have this pool of money sitting there, and that's an easy target for an administration that is looking to save money.
And on the, back to the juvenile side, I mean, the juvenile detention alternatives that we've been able to implement in Douglas County literally have saved us. Juveniles being in our detention center. I mean, when we built our detention center, we built it to house 144. we hit an all-time high of about 200, averaging 200 kids in our juvenile detention center before we started to implement these juvenile detention alternatives. And so today we generally see about a 90 number for our juvenile center. So the alternatives have worked, but again, that pot of money that we get to give to providers as well as to internal departments that utilize those dollars to provide these programs, it is paying off. I mean, we're not housing as many kids anymore in our secure or non-secure facility. They're being provided services in the community where we increase the home program, the bracelet program. Those are being utilized much more than what they were in the past. So again, another pot of money that we're gonna have to, unfortunately, you know, we play a lot of defense rather than offense, but we're gonna have to play defense on being able to keep those community-based dollars for the juveniles. But to your point, I understand, Carrie, what you're saying about the per diem.
Yeah, it's I mean, you need to know the true costs, because it's really the area of post-adjudication that you're not seeing the community-based alternatives available. If the state could look at that and say, hey, we could spend the same amount of money, we'd have fewer kids in detention, and we'd have a more effective system. But as long as the counties are picking up a portion of the tab for the locking the kids up, they just don't have the incentive to look at that as much.
Anything else on item 3? Next is the discussion regarding employee and retiree health insurance. Who put this one on? Did we? We did. Do you want to come up and talk about it?
I don't have anything really prepared, but I can just tell you to summarize what the county board's been looking at, and that is the ever-increasing cost of health insurance, particularly as it relates to not only current employees but retirees. We're projecting our costs for our employee/retiree health plan to go up approximately 18%, and we are going to internally eat half of that through our health insurance reserve fund, and then we will pass on a 9% increase to our employees. Another change that we made this year is to increase the percentage that retirees are going to contribute to their premiums. Previously, it's been that an employee with single coverage would pay 25% of the cost of the premium, or a single retiree, and a family retiree with family coverage would pay 35%, and that's going up to 40-50. Is that right, Joe? 40% for single retiree coverage and 50% for family retiree coverage, which has gotten, obviously, the attention of the unions has got some pushback, but that's what's being implemented. So the question now is, what do we do going forward in the long term? So the county board is going to be looking at several options for both active and retiree coverage, particularly with the active coverage is, you know, do we do something completely different? And one of the options would be to contract with one facility. So maybe we contract with Methodist Health System, or we contract with Nebraska Med Center, or we contract with CHI, and everybody has to go there. And I know that they've done that in Sedgwick County. I think there really is only one health system in Sedgwick County, so it makes it a lot easier. But that is one of the things, particularly that one of the unions wants us to look at. So that is one option. Another option, there's been all kinds of options. Do we give money to employees and let them go buy their own coverage, which I really don't think is a viable option. So really the staff is going to be tasked with looking at some options going forward, you know, for the long term. And then of course retiree healthcare, most places don't provide retiree coverage. So that's really something that we're going to have to take a long, hard look at. And then, you know, we have Rule 75, which means people retire early, potentially, particularly in law enforcement and corrections. So they retire at 50, let's say 51 years old, and then they don't get Medicare until they're 65. So then what do they do if they don't have retiree coverage? They have Obamacare, and you don't know what's going to happen with the exchanges. That's not I guess the optimism level for the future of that is probably not very high. So that's really where we're at right now. We're really being forced to look at some creative ways to do things differently. And of course, the other thing is out there is ACOs. And accountable care organizations may or may not be the future. There are a lot of strong points with ACOs, but the pushback is, particularly with the unions, is it's a glorified HMO. And any of us that were, employed with the counties in the 90s know how that went over. So that's kind of a synopsis of where we're at.
So just, does Sarpy and Lancaster provide insurance to their retirees?
At Lancaster, we do not. We do not. There's a COBRA, so it gets you a little bit of time, but we are more involved with a PEP program, a post-employment health program, where during your career, you get $25 put away, every pay period, and it goes into a PEP account. And then when you retire, you are, depending on which group you're in, you get part of your accumulated sick leave paid out, and it goes into that PEP account. So then that way, when you walk out of the building, you've got this PEP account, and then you can utilize that for your health insurance costs, meds, things like that, but you're really then off of our books. So basically, once you walk out, then I guess we could say Lancaster County then no longer cares. You take your money and you go do what you need to, and our liability is gone.
We care, but we're not going to pay.
I speak from the financial side when we don't care. But from the financial side, we don't care.
And what's your retirement age or program? Is it a rule like ours?
It is not.
10 years of service and yeah, early retirement, 10 years of service is 55. For IRS purposes, I think it's 59 and a half. Per capita.
But our retirement program is a lot different than yours also, because once you walk out that door, you've got your pool here, and that's it. So
what's the city do in Lincoln?
Same?
The union probably does something, but they have a PEP program as well.
Yeah, they've got a PEP program over there also. So they don't have a huge liability on the retiree. You got your fire and your police.
And what about Sarpy?
I'll give a copy to, I may just look at a copy, I'll give you a copy of Lancaster one, I'll give you one too. The front page is just what our actual premium is going to be this year for current employees. Option 2 is what the county board selected. And the only change we made this year to try to keep our premium down was to increase the out-of-pocket cost of the employee. So there's been a lot of debate about what the employee's contribution ought to be on a monthly basis for their insurance. On the second page is the retiree one, and you can see it's based on what union they're in or whether they're management, they're salaried management, and it's kind of all over the board in terms of when they're eligible to get the benefit. The one thing that's not is that they have to have worked for the county for 15 years. So unless they've worked for the county for 15 years, they would not be eligible for retiree health insurance. And you can see what our percentages would be for single or family coverage based on their age when they leave. But I will say that we have very few people that take the retiree benefit.
But what age are they retiring?
Well, it depends. The ones that would retire earlier might be law enforcement, but you see that if most of them have family coverage and they have to pay, for example, 50% of the premium, they don't do it. They can't afford it. So they stay on longer, and so they normally don't retire until they're like 62 or 63 or some even 65, and then they go on Medicare. So
even though it's a reasonably good benefit for retirees, the cost of it is so high that we just don't have just maybe a handful of people that would take the benefit.
And Larry, as far as the other counties in the program through NACO, that's not provided, right?
I'm not aware of any other county that offers a retirement plan to any of those employees. Recently, the NACO board just negotiated a thing with First Concord to assist people as they reach that retirement age for the possibility that they can leave their county plan and the county can put together sort of a package, not a PEP program, but it's similar to that. It's somewhat of a in lieu of plan that if they elect to go over to Medicare, then there is some money that comes through, and First Concord will help them with the paperwork to get that filled out through the federal government. And so it's a new program that's being offered really to all counties, but the county has to have a process in place where you compensate them some amount of money to come off of your health insurance.
Any other questions or comments on that? I know one of the other things that, and Marcos, if you want to chime in terms of the union perspective, one of the other ideas that they brought up was to do a big push to get more people on the HSA program that we have. We have a limited number of individuals on that, and we give 1,000 or 500? 1,000 to each employee for being on that program in terms of like wellness stuff and that. So it's a good program, but when we first started it, there was a lot of misinformation and I would say fear from employees that were hearing bad things about HSA programs, and so there was a limited number of employees that actually took advantage of it. But the union, especially our sheriff's union, feels that there should be a bigger push to move folks towards that program, and that would save a lot of money on insurance costs. Marcos, I don't know if you have anything else you want to, there was kind of what they talked about, those three things.
Yeah.
Patrick?
But just a couple things. One, I'll say,
Can you stand up, Pat?
Okay, just one thing I'll say, my experience is unions hate HSAs because it, I'll say loud, in their language, they forces employees to make more independent decisions about their own health care. And unions don't like that. They're very paternalistic. This is me. They're very paternalistic, and so they want basic PPO health plan with the low deductibles. One of the unions is pushing a central states plan, which is a Teamsters plan, which 71 of our employees, highway department employees, are on now. There's some issues with that plan. For example, if an employee wants to waive out of that plan, not take the coverage, the county still has to pay the full cost of that premium to central states, whether the employee is covered or not. It also doesn't provide retiree health insurance. There's some other aspects. It is lower deductibles, but there's some other aspects of it that are not, in my opinion, employee friendly or county friendly. But that is a push that's going to be made, is to go more employees, more bargaining is going to central states. But I agree with Mary Ann. HSA is the way to go, but it's how you get there.
And that central states plan, you also do not get claim history for your county. It's claim history as a whole, and that is not a good thing for counties in terms of trying to figure out what your costs are. So, but we had in the past, we had a pretty it ebbs and flows, but we've had good years where our claims were pretty low, and this past year they were really, really high. So that's where again some of the 18% increase came, was because we had a bad claim year. No.
I'd be interested to know what are on your family and single plans in Douglas and Lancaster County. What are your cost shares for your employees? 80-20?
80-20.
So, yeah, on Lancaster.
Oh, I'm sorry. For what? For the cost or for the premium?
for the premium.
Oh, okay, Marcus.
Yeah, it depends what, and maybe it helps if I give a little background on our insurance in general, but cost share depends what classification you're in. So if you're single, as an example, it's 93.7, and then it changes, it broadens depending on the classification that you're put in. So employee plus one, employee family coverage, employee plus two, whatever. So, but it does start off for all of our plans at 93.7 for the single one. That's the one where the county covers the most. A little bit of background on our plans.
But it's 85/15.
But it's 85/15, right, for the
Perfect.
right, the one that is least covered by the county. The county covers 85%. So that's the smallest amount. A little bit of background on our plans though. We have like, okay, oh, thanks Coach. I would say like about a year ago, we had about half of our employees on, I guess I'm going back a little bit. We have one health insurance plan, like one PPO plan, but we have two different plans as far as two different deductible plans. So there's a 300-600 plan, and then there's a 600-1200 plan. And depending on what union you were in, you were put in the low deductible plan or the high deductible plan. We have seen performance, like claims, in the higher plan be much cheaper than the lower plan. So over the course of 2 years through negotiations, Diane and I have been trying to migrate unions over to the higher deductible plan, the 600-1200 plan, 600 single, 1200 plan. And you know, and it's been kind of a challenge. The premiums are cheaper, and they will be in 2017 too, in the higher deductible plan, as you would expect. But it's getting people to migrate. We're right now, I believe, at about 70% of our union employees have migrated to that higher deductible plan. I still have about 30% on that lower plan. So.
So on the Lancaster side, for singles, the majority of the employees, it's 95.5. We do have one that's 93.7. And then on the other 2 to 4 and the families, the majority of them are 85/15. We do have one union that's 80/20.
So I have an opinion on this, and I'm probably alone, so let me just make sure I point that out. But both of you, Lancaster and Douglas, have better plans than we have in Sarpy County, and I believe our plans in Sarpy County are unaffordable. We're 83/17 and 90/10, and I think there's a little nuance in there for adult plus one. It might be somewhere, it's a little less than 83/17. I don't recall what it is. And we also have a wellness plan, which is voluntary. We implemented that about 2 years ago under like a crawl, walk, run approach to try to incentivize people to get involved. We give them a gift certificate or something nominal like that. But I think where we need to head is I mean, again, private sector, 83/17, are you kidding me? Nobody does that. I mean, most corporations are 60/40. Some of the more generous ones are 66/33. But I mean, and I understand how we got here, because there was a time when government jobs, salaries weren't as competitive as the private sector, but that's not the case anymore. So we've got labor unions that we can only negotiate with once every 3 years. And in Sarpy County, I'm sure it's similar in the other counties, we have 5 different labor unions we have to negotiate with individually. And they're all at different times. But about a year and a half ago, we had Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and they came to us and said, Sarpy County, we love you guys, and we're raising your premiums 15%. Or maybe it was even higher. And we said, well, we can't afford that. That's unsustainable for us. So we went out on the market and thought we could get a better deal. And we believed the sales pitch from another company, and we switched. And after 6 months, we switched back because it was horrible. And so we're back with Blue Cross Blue Shield. Instead of paying like 18 or whatever they wanted initially, I think they kept our negotiated rate with the new company of about 12%. This year, initially, our insurance broker came to us and said, your premiums are going up over 20%. And that's not unique to Sarpy County. I mean, the city of Papillions was 35. I mean, their initial bogey. And I'm sure you guys have seen those too. So what we've done the last 3 years now with the employees is to keep their premiums at the same ratio, is we keep nickel and diming them to death. You know, we raised the deductible, we raised the cost shares, and we did it again this year. And to me, it's just a shell game. And the reality is we need to raise the premiums, the ratios, so to bring them more in line with what the county's doing. I mean, with what the private sector's doing. And the reason I say that is because it's unsustainable. This year in Sarpy County, we're paying an $860,000 in insurance costs. I mean, just do the rule of 72. You know, the last two cycles that we renewed our policy, our premiums have gone up 12% in each case. So we're going to double our insurance costs in a matter of 5 years, and we can't afford that. I mean, $880,000 is it could be up to 6 or 7 FTEs. I mean, we're all right now surviving under the luxury of a broadening tax base, but that's not going to continue forever. Certainly in Sarpy County, the smallest county in the state, we've developed out just about everything we can develop out, and now we're looking for innovative ways to develop out what we haven't developed out. But nevertheless, at some point, you know, we all got to be a little bit pragmatic and realistic and say we can't afford this anymore. And I'm a little discouraged to know that it's hard to make that argument in Sarpy County when I look at Lancaster and Douglas and how generous you are with your benefits. In addition, I think you have a defined pension plan, don't you? You guys, you in Lincoln, you don't? Yeah. And you do in Douglas County, correct? Defined benefit plan? Well, then that's similar in that regard. But at some point, I mean, the initiative I'm going to be pushing in my next 4 years on the county board is to increase those premiums back, because it's unaffordable, it's unsustainable. And the last thought I wanted to leave you with is I'm trying to think outside the box here. How do we drive down our costs? Well, Sarpy County, 600 employees. I don't know. Douglas is probably much larger, as is Lancaster. But I almost wonder, you know, what does the state do? I know that NACO offers a plan for all the smaller counties, and by doing that, by increasing their pool size, they're able to drive their costs down. And I wonder for the larger 3 counties, if there was something that maybe if we combined into one group for insurance, if it would save us all money in the long run, or maybe go back to the state and say, hey, maybe we need to get back in line with the state. I don't know what the answer is, but just some thoughts I got on health insurance.
Blair?
Part of why we're so generous is the CIR has ruled for us the ratio that an employee pays is the subject of negotiation. It's in our contracts. The CIR forces us to do that. So.
In a couple of
What's our insurance cost, Joe? Do you have?
What, the total amount we pay?
Yeah, when he said 800 and some thousand for Sarpy.
But they're fully insured too, though. Aren't you fully insured? Are we?
We're partially,
Last year, our health claims were about 32 million.
And we have in the past actually looked at what you're exactly talking about, which I think we should look at it again just because of changes that have occurred. But we have had conversations about the NACO plan, but I think it would be beneficial to have the 3 largest counties talk about it again to see if there was any benefit. Some of the changes that we've made were along the lines of retirement, where it's not a rule of 75 for new hires, it's a straight 65, except for 65 years old, except for the sheriff's deputies. And we're hoping that that will help in terms of, you know, as we're trying to decide what the next step is with the current retiree population, that won't be an issue for the new hires down the road, because once they retire at 65, they'll go straight on Medicare unless that age gets increased. And then the wellness program, come on up, Larry. The wellness program, we actually did exactly what you did, where we incentivized them. It was a voluntary thing, and they could get a gift card if they hit so many points. But what we did this year, and we actually hired, it was an internal committee that did all of the wellness program, and we hired out Bavari, I think it's called, and we changed to a premium incentive. So if you hit these goals along the way, then you could potentially see a reduction in your premium. And we're just starting that. That was a change this year.
So the NACO pool, when you look at the NACO pool in the other counties, it would be similar, it would be actually a little bit smaller than what Douglas County is standalone in your premium costs. And I think if we were to go down this path, you know, we've sort of had this conversation many years ago at NACO of actually creating a secondary pool of the 3 largest counties, because if you take Douglas County's numbers and Lancaster County's numbers and Sarpy County's numbers and put them together, you'll have a significant pool that probably can be managed. And because even with our small numbers, there's some benefit to pooling in that area. So if that's something that the counties want to look at, certainly because we've set up a pool before, NACO's interested in helping to facilitate that conversation. I think it may be something you want to look at.
Any other comments or questions on that issue? The next one is the discussion regarding Greenbelt, criteria used to approve or deny. And who put this one on? Sarpy? Who wants to come up and talk about it?
He just walked out.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Don Kelly wanted it on there.
Don?
He just stepped out.
I'm here.
Oh, there.
Do you want to come up and talk about the next issue for Greenbelt that
sure.
you want to talk?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, our county assessor, Dan Pittman's here, and we have talked back and forth about this issue for at least 3 or 4 years. And under equalization, if everybody doesn't pay their fair share of taxes, everybody else in the counties have to pick up the tab. So Greenbelt is a great law. I mean, I think personally that because it protects the farmers in urban areas, so they can continue to farm and their property values don't become so astronomical that it makes it unaffordable for them to maintain their farms. However, in Sarpy County, what I have seen a proliferation of is people that are, well, as I told Claire, just because you buy a farm, it doesn't make you a farmer. And I've talked to some of the real farmers in Sarpy County, and they really have an issue with this, because folks with 5 or 10 acres are getting Greenbelt exemption. And it's not because the assessors are generous, it's because the statute's so wide you can drive a truck through it. So what I'd kind of like to see is some sort of statutory change in the language that defines what a farm is. And we brought this up about 3 years ago, and I think it was Mr. Hutchins from Lancaster County, Larry?
Hutchins.
Yeah, Hutchins, I'm sorry. And he was telling me that Lancaster, they use a Form F. Is that right, Lancaster? Do you guys require that? Or is that just Larry saying that's what he wanted? I don't recall. But I don't know what the measure is to determine a farm. But when somebody of wealth buys a 20-acre parcel in Sarpy County and comes down and pays his neighbor to roll a couple bale of hays, and then he pays property taxes that's we're 10% of the actual value, it's not fair. And so we need to arm our assessors with some tools so that they can actually assess these property values more correctly. Right now, there's really not much they can do. And here's a perfect example, and I'll leave the name out because the name's not important. But this individual has about 100 acres down on the Platte River, and it's beautiful land if you love to hunt. It's almost 100% timberland. It's very rolling slopes right off the Platte River. Has a real nice residence. I'll call it a residence. It's not a full-time residence, but it's a nice home. It's got 3 bathrooms, 3 or 4 bedrooms. It's got corrugated tin on the outside, or aluminum, so it looks more like a shed than a house, but it's really a nice place. And we took the Greenbelt exemption away because we saw no evidence of an agribusiness occurring there. And so when it came up before the Board of Equalization, the landowner's attorney came and brought some evidence to present to the Board of Equalization. That evidence included a couple pictures of a goat and another picture of a stack of timber that was cut, supposedly for sold it for pallets, to build pallets. The total receipts, as I recall, were about, over a 4-year period, were less than $2,000 in agricultural income. And because the statute is so nebulous, our assessor had no option but to grant the Greenbelt exception, because that in and of itself is enough proof under the current statute to say that this is a viable agribusiness. So therefore, this person pays less property taxes than I pay on my 1/3 of an acre home site in Papillion. And it's just not right, because obviously under equalization, they're not paying their fair share. And there's numerous examples in Sarpy County that I could cite, and I'm sure it's the same in Douglas, and I'm sure it's the same in Lancaster. Again, I want to protect the family farm. I want to protect the folks that farm for a living, that fill out Schedule Fs, that have a viable entity to keep their property taxes at a rate that allows them to farm. Because whether you live in Douglas, Sarpy, or Lancaster County, all our heritages come from the rural folks that initially settled our county land. So I want to protect that for them as long as they want to continue to do it. But it's the people that are coming in and taking advantage of what I would call a weak statute, and really ties the hands of our assessors, that I was hoping that, at least as the 3 largest counties where Greenbelt applies, we could come to some consensus to have our lobbyists and our legislators, carry that bucket of water for us down in Lincoln in the upcoming session. So that's really all I have.
Dan Pittman, Sarpy County Assessor. Let me give you a little idea of where you've been. In 1985, our first definition of agricultural and horticultural land said the land had to be over 20 acres, it had to be in continuous production, it had to have local zoning predominantly for agriculture, and if you had under 20 acres, you could be considered for Greenbelt or special valuation if you could show $1,000 of income over 2 out of 3 years. So at one time, this was a pretty strict program, and it seemed to make a lot of sense. That eroded through the years, and today there's no land size requirement, there's no requirement for continuous production, there's no zoning requirement, and no proof of income. So what remains is that the land's got to be located outside the city's jurisdiction or an SID, and that the land has to be used for the commercial production of any plant or animal in a raw or unprocessed state. So that's kind of what it leaves us with in the statute, is that commercial production is a one hook. If they're in commercial production, commerce is taking place, then they should be able to receive Greenbelt. Now, Senator Hudkins in the past had made an argument that there's a lot of niche farming anymore, and we've got niche farming in Sarpy County. We've got pasture chickens, which is not a free-range chicken, but it's chickens raised in pastures. And I went out and I had to see this for myself, and they actually pasture chickens. But, and if you're interested, I'll explain to you later. But, and then woody florals, and then seeds and nuts and things like that. There's all this niche organic stuff going on. So you got to concede that point, I think, that they're doing more with less land. But why not an income requirement? Why not show us a Schedule F? Why not give us receipts? Our homestead exemption program, there's an income requirement, and you have to file annually. Permissive exemptions, they have to file annually, but we're not monitoring this close enough. So what I'm looking for as an assessor is just something that I can require from a property owner that shows me, indeed, I am farming this, I'm getting some kind of income, and I would be happy personally. So that's it for me.
Mike Goodwillie, Douglas County Assessor's Office. Yeah, Dan's got some of the history right here. At one time, there were pretty rigid tests for both income and acreages, and it is part of that boutique agriculture that made some of it go away. If you want to go in that direction of a rigid income cap, I suppose you can, but you may have instances where you have people that are doing commercial production and haven't generated any income yet. Dan, do you have vineyards in Sarpy County?
And orchards.
Yeah, my understanding is you can go a number of years after you plant your vineyard before you get a crop that's worth anything. So what are you going to do about the guy who's planted stuff stem to stern? He's not generating any income yet, but he's doing a hell of a lot more agriculture than a guy who hays just enough to sell, you know, whatever the old test was, $1,000 a year or something like that. That's not a heck of a lot of money. I mean, the devil in this is going to be in the details. And so if you want to go forward with something, you know, by all means, if that's how you feel, but understand, once you start to put in hard and fast barriers, you're going to have people, you know, on either side of that line. You know, on one side of the line, you look at him and say, this isn't what we had in mind. On the others, you say, gee, that guy ought to qualify, but he, you know, for all intents and purposes, but he doesn't. To add another history lesson, there was 1 year, I think it was 2007, where the legislature, at the behest of Farm Bureau, adopted some legislation to try and cut back on the hobby farmers qualifying for special valuation. And they said, instead of looking at how the vacant acres are used, look at the parcel as a whole, including the buildings, you know, including the improvements. The idea was to catch that guy who's got $1 million house and he's got 10 acres and he sells a little bit of hay off of it a couple of times a year. That lasted exactly 1 year. In a lot of counties across the state, you had assessors saying to people, we don't think you qualify any longer. They exercised their rights to protest to the County Board of Equalization, and many boards had a difficult time in standing behind the new law. And that law lasted exactly a year. The very next session, the legislature at the Farm Bureau's behest, because obviously they changed their mind, went back to saying, look at the vacant acres. So this has been through a lot of history, and part of the issue behind it has been one size hasn't always fit all. So if you want to go forward, that's fine, but you may want to have some idea of what you want to do about these kind of odd socks, because there's going to be more of them than you think. Thank you.
I certainly don't want to relive 2007. That was a nightmare when we did it, and a lot of it was we were watching our neighboring county, and then they were watching us, and it was like, well, if they're getting it, then we got to get, well, how can they be like right next door and be doing it different? And I mean, it was, as Mike Goodwillie said, that you had one on this side that looked real clear to you, but then one on this side that was maybe a little iffy, but still looked pretty much like this one. So what do you do? And so I think, if I remember right, we basically gave it to everybody that year.
Yes, we did.
Pretty much. And again, as Mike said, it was changed. You know, so we had people who were, you know, had fish in a pond that were getting greenbelt, that were growing brome or
Yes,
grass.
Couldn't cut seed off.
Yeah, I mean, they had cattle that came in and fed a certain number of weeks or months, and the income was there. So, I mean, it's a tough one, and it isn't a one size fits all because there's so many variables. But I do think that is one that as counties we need to take a look at, and we need to be the ones that are there at the table to really try to figure out what we want those details to be, because it is hard. Anything else on that issue? I think at this point, since we're so close to lunch and Randy coming in, why don't we take a break, have everybody do their bathroom break, and then when Randy comes here, we'll listen to him and then we'll share lunch. So if everybody could take their seats for just 2 minutes. Randy understands that he's in between you all and food, so he knows he won't be long-winded. But again, we would like to thank Randy for allowing us the use of this nice facility, and I ask you to give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Wow. I looked at you guys' agenda that they sent me, and your agenda's a lot of hard work and hard lifting, and I send my condolences. And in this day and age with state budget cuts and everybody's idea on how counties should operate, for once I can say I'm very pleased to be the president of Metropolitan Community College that serves the counties, except for Lancaster, Southeast does. And we certainly thank you all for choosing Metro as a place to meet. We have a number of initiatives going on in this campus. It's a $90 million building project out here, these 3 buildings, and a central heating plant and air conditioning plant to go with it. And it's a public-private partnership. It's the largest public-private partnership at a community college in America. There's a little over $60 million in private money, and then $30 million through our tuition and state reimbursement and property tax. So as taxpayers of the 4 counties we serve, you do have some skin in the game here. The good news is it never raised your taxes. The better news is this is all going to be staffed with private money, and it's not going to raise your taxes. So in this day and age, that was what we wanted to accomplish. And this is all about the trades. There are construction education buildings. There's a building for jobs of the future, which, by the way, is the best job in Omaha, the job that doesn't exist yet. And we're training you in baseline IT and trades for that. For example, TD Ameritrade, they needed people to run the computerized climate control system like this building has, and they were unable to find them. Metro cobbled together a program that's now turned into a massive program of environmental control services, computerization and HVAC systems that trained, and the job started at about $60,000 for 2-year grads. So I really understand that Nebraska starts at the city level, the village level. I come from a very small village in Nebraska, and it goes up and through the counties, and we're just proud as a community college to be part of what you are all doing. And so thank you. And I do stand between you and the lunch. Fred Yu is looking at me right now. It's time for lunch. Thank you. Hey, do you have any questions before I leave the podium? Very good. Yeah.
Thank you. DJ. And when do you start in surf?
Pardon?
When do you start in surf?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Planning expert named Deborah Knight, South Dakota. She came down and she kind of led a strategic planning session, all-day session for the county board. And out of that came a strategic plan that was approved this past April by the county board. And there was short-term priorities, long-term priorities,
I just talked a little bit about some of the priorities that are in our plan, maybe some of them that we haven't talked about today. And one of them was to study various types of enhanced budgeting processes. I know that zero-based budgeting has been kind of a term of art lately, but it's obviously it has some issues when you have elected officials to deal with, and they have their own budgets. So zero-based budgeting or other forms of budgeting to see if there's something a little different that we can do going forward. But that's not something that's going to happen this next year, but it's definitely something that we're looking at for the future. Also, we're talking about our benefit system and possibly looking at a paid time off system versus just a strict vacation accrual, sick leave accrual, doing something different in that regard. One of the issues with PTO would be, I think we're one of the few jurisdictions in Douglas County where our sick leave applies to our pension rather than being cashed out at time of separation of employment. So, but definitely looking at different issues with sick leave, vacation leave. One of the issues with vacation leave is that there's different provisions and Supreme Court decisions that have come down from the Nebraska Supreme Court, particularly as it relates to the use it or lose it provisions. So if somebody doesn't use all their vacation leave at the end of the year, what happens to it? Do they get cashed out? Do they lose it? So there's issues with that. We hired a PIO. That was one of our strategic planning initiatives, a public information officer. And some of the things we're looking at are, enhanced citizen engagement. How can we go about doing that? One of those ways would be the use of enhanced social media. Leah has a lot of experience with social media. She was the deputy online editor of the World Herald up until about a week ago. So we're really excited about what we can do to better educate the public about what the county does and why it's important to care about what the county does. We also talked about developing a plan to reduce pretrial numbers faster, and that's something that Andy mentioned. We talked about a little bit today, just a side conversation about how do we get offenders or people that are charged with a crime moved through the system faster. And there's some real issues with that. One of the things that we've talked about is possibly merging the city prosecutor and the county attorney. Those discussions will be ongoing. Also, establishing a mental health court. There's been a lot of discussion. That's going to take, obviously, the blessing of the Chief Justice Mike Heavican, but I do think that will happen. Just a matter of time. Develop drawings for juvenile justice campus. The county has looked long and hard about what to do with our juvenile courts in a very crowded courthouse, trying to consolidate probation, juvenile detention alternatives, the courts. And one of the things that I've looked at is possibly taking some room at the 42nd and Woolworth location, which is our Midtown campus, where we have our health center and our youth center. And maybe, there's some very old state buildings there that house some social services, state social services, but possibly using that space to construct a campus to consolidate all of those juvenile justice services. Also, part of our priorities is to pursue public-private health partnerships, for example, with the federally funded healthcare centers like Charles Drew. So that is something that the county board has engaged in some discussions, and that will be ongoing. And also enhancing employee wellness program as it relates to health insurance and just overall wellness of our employees. So, there's a lot of other things that were put in. These are some of the more specific priorities that I think will be kind of focused and prioritized over the next couple of years.
Any questions for Patrick? Maybe either one of the other counties want to tell us about their?
Pat, to talk a little bit more about zero-based budgeting, what are you thinking about there?
Well, zero-based budgeting, what I know of it is you basically start from zero every year, and with all the departments, they have to justify every dollar that they spend. So now, you come in, you have a budget, your treasurer comes in and says, this is what I had last year, I'm asking for 3% increase, and here's why. But the premise is always what they had before is going to stay. But zero-based budgeting is every year you have to start over again, and you have to justify every dollar. And in the private sector, I think it's easier to do in the public sector when you have 8 autonomous elected officials who are responsible to the county board for the budget, approving the budget, but not how the dollars are spent necessarily. So it is definitely something that we're serious to look at. I do have some concerns whether or not it would be successful, but that is something.
We've talked about this in Lancaster County, and tried it with a couple of departments past budget cycle, and we didn't succeed. And the problem, I think, is changing people's attitude toward how you build a budget. The best predictor of next year's budget is this year's budget plus some increment, because that's how we've always done it. Well, that guarantees that you're going to increase spending, and over time, it gets to the point where it's unsustainable. And you get faced with, like Lancaster, where we can't do much because the only way you can do very much is to get more property tax money, which of course is the kiss of death, at least in Lancaster, and I think it is everywhere else. What is hard to do is to get people in those departments that are building these budgets to distinguish between what is essential and what is desirable. You cannot really eliminate the essentials or cut the essentials, but if you can identify the desirables, those things ought to be things you can manipulate. You can fund some, you can maybe not fund all of it.
Well, then you need the political will to eliminate those things that are desirable too.
Yeah, I know,
And that's
but
that's very, very difficult, to do that, because you have 7 or you have 5 elected officials that have their own passions and priorities. So really, all you can do, unless you do go to zero-based, I'm not saying it's impossible, but there are obviously challenges, is to say this is what we're giving you, money-wise, and you're going to have to. That's all you're going to get. So you determine where you're going to cut, and that's.
But I'll just tell you, I've had conversations with senators and.
Todd, can you go turn around?
Sorry. I've never been told I don't talk loud, but I'll up here. We have had this conversation, Bill and I were new to the county board 2 years ago, and we did have quite a bit of resistance because it had never been done before. But I've had a number of conversations with both newly elected state senators, people in the governor's administration, and you're going to start hearing about this more coming from the state because with the challenges that they're facing, with budget issues, it's having to go in and justify the dollars, re-examining the programs, making sure that the taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely. That's really ultimately, as Bill indicated, the reason for zero-based budgeting is not just doing what we did last year, adding 1 or 2% to the budget, and that's what we're going to spend. It really is, and it comes back to political will. A lot of the issues are because some of these elected officials don't ever have an opponent in the general election. So they really don't ever go out, and I told this to the elected officials in Lancaster County, a couple of them who were vocally opposed to it. I told them, I said, you wouldn't have these same problems or concerns if you had actually gone out and talked to voters, because voters do not want a raise in their property taxes. And that's just ultimate fact. It is, not very popular. And so how we combat that is by doing more doing more with less. But being able to, utilize those dollars. And so zero-based budgeting or some form of it, I think as we move forward in the next few years in this environment, I think you're going to be hearing more and more about it. So.
Let me just make one other comment. When we were having our hearings on the budget, I asked one of the elected officials, can you distinguish between some things that are essential and some things that are just desirable? The answer was, everything in this budget is equally essential. Now, you can't have zero-based budgeting into thinking like that.
Well, maybe it's because I'm a lifetime public sector employee, but I kind of cringe at, and everybody says it nowadays that do more with less does assume great inefficiencies. I think in county government, you're fortunate to do the same amount with less, if you can, much less more with less. Not to say that there's not efficiencies that can be created, but you know, we're not a hog in county government, just not. So I already said too much on this.
Zero-based budgeting is a nice buzzword. But if you look at it, I'm a mathematician by training, if you look at it, it's really smoke and mirrors. It's no different than the regular budgeting process where you do analytical analysis of each and every essential need. You analyze everything. We do that now. Douglas County does. We look at it very carefully. Yeah, we do. We look at every item that we can control as a county board. Now, we cannot control what the sheriff does. We cannot control what the assessor does. There are areas we do not control, but within our own sphere, we look at absolutely every dollar. And we question the purpose of everything. Now, budgeting is a very complex. You know, I ran a business for 45 years. I ran my own budget. Government budgeting is very different than running a business budgeting. You know, you've got grants and other things. Zero-based budgeting, how do you factor in the grants? How do you factor in the programs that are being funded by outside sources for the greater good of the community? So I'm not sure zero-based budgeting is what we're looking for. We're looking for analytical budgeting. If you look at what Oregon does and study their system, they have a great system, and it's pretty much was decided by the community where they wanted their money to go. So study Oregon's budgeting process.
Yeah. And in regard to that zero-based budgeting, I think there's one thing that it's not going to happen automatically. You just don't wave a wand and say, we're going to go to zero-based budgeting. I think there needs to be a real education process. And you know, there is a learning curve that needs to happen. And before we can be really successful at zero-based budgeting, we really do need to look at what is the education that needs to happen first before we ask people to do the zero-based budgeting.
Yeah.
Can I change the subject from zero-based budgeting? I want to follow up on a question and a comment. In the last year, we merged our juvenile division of the city attorney's office with the juvenile division of the county attorney's office. So as you think about that for us, that was a good place to start because we had two different systems. It was hard on families, it was hard on attorneys, it was hard on our public defenders. So it took us about 18 months, but it was successful. And then I think I heard Sarpy say this as well, that you incentivize your employees for positive health decisions. We've been told by our county attorney that we can offer no incentives, that that's a violation of law. So I wanted to know how you guys are getting around that, because I've heard gift certificates, I've heard premium reductions, and I've heard everything. How are you doing that? Because they won't let us.
It's not illegal, it's taxed.
It's what?
It's
You have to tax.
You have to tax the gift cards to income. And that's obviously a challenge because they'll get a gift card, but then all of a sudden they'll have money taken out of their paycheck for taxes. So we're gonna move away from that because we did it for a couple years and now we're gonna move towards premium incentives. And that's just the future. I think premium incentives are really the future of how to do premium.
Our county attorney will have to talk with that, Gary?
What does that stand for? Something.
We used to have a good football team too. When you were returning punts.
No, you were bad then. You were very bad. Didn't think I could then. We're meeting this Thursday with our county attorney to discuss the legal opinion that gave rise to this discussion. I don't think they're saying you can't do it. There's just a number of steps that you have to follow. And
including the provisions of the Miscellaneous Expenditures Act. We need to get that in our resolution that covers gifts and other things and incentives. So we probably can do it. It's just to give somebody a $50 gift certificate turned out to be very painful for them and for us. So we were trying to offer incentives to complete a health survey.
Right.
And that's what led to the whole discussion. So we may be able to accomplish it. It's just a little more circular than we hopefully.
Stats on our wellness program. Didn't we have our insurance broker pay for some of those incentives to fill out the survey? So that wasn't any county money.
We did that, and that probably wasn't a good thing to do, but we funneled it through our broker to pay for the gift cards. And that was last year. This year we gave gift cards, and we did tell people that they had to pay the tax on it.
Right.
We also, the other thing that we did that we've got a good response on is we're taking time off away for participating, so we think we'll have more participation by offering that. And that's low cost. It's like 8 hours. But there's things they have to do in the program to qualify for that.
Sarpy County had a strategic plan that we've been working on since about 2013. We hired Marjorie Fuentes, I guess, from Austin Peters Group out of Kansas City to help us with that, and we've updated it back in 2014. We came up with, and I gave the handout to Marianne and to also to Carrie, so you can see our plan and some of the work that we've done on it. We really came up with 7 ideas that we were going to work on, and we really started this with meeting with mayors, and we met with business groups, business leaders in the community to see what their thoughts were, as well as what our staff's thoughts were in terms of what should our priorities be in terms of the strategic plan. And some of the bigger ones that we've been working on, obviously, have been on the infrastructure improvements that we need to make, both from a building standpoint and then also sanitary sewer and roads. We're the only county that's really got involved with wastewater. I'm not sure that that's what a lot of counties want to get involved with, and I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a huge thing for us because a lot of the growth that we've been dealing with in Sarpy County is outside the city limits, and so we've been having to do that through the county and through the legislation that we receive. We currently have a task force that is looking at all of our infrastructure in terms of, we have 2 of them. One that deals with all the buildings that we are looking at, the leases that we have, the current facilities we have, and then what are we going to need in the next 5 to 10 years for facilities. A lot of that is being determined by law enforcement, of course, because of our correctional, what would you call a corrections facility, or jail, and all the needs that they have for probation, all the juvenile and adult probation offices, which we talked about a little bit about. We talked about HHS, but we also house our probation offices, and they're continuing to grow. So we have to provide housing for those staffs as well. And in terms of roads, we have a separate group that's looking at what our road improvement needs are. And with a lot of, probably somewhat with Omaha and Lancaster, it really rings true in Sarpy County. Our growth is really requiring a lot of our Public Works Department and our county engineer to keep up with all the SIDs that are being created and the roads that need to be improved to follow all that growth. So we could probably have a $20 million a year budget for that department, and we only have about 8. So it's one of those things that unless there's additional revenues that we can find, we'll never keep up. We are looking at the possibility of doing a railroad transportation district with a couple of the cities. Lancaster County's done that. I don't know if Douglas has. We're going to certainly look at that, but again, it's property tax that we're looking at adding to. Some of the other things that we talked about in our strategic plan deal with economic development, working with our Sarpy County Economic Development Corporation, maintaining support of that, keeping them out and updated.
We've updated our comprehensive plan. We're just finishing that up this year. In our planning department, we also participated in a plan with MAPA. Probably Douglas County did as well. The JALA study, that was the Offutt Joint Land Use Study, and our support of maintaining Offutt in the state and in Sarpy County. We had a number of other initiatives which you can hopefully carry and Patrick can pass on to you that looked at other alternatives for incarcerating prisoners. We're continuing to do that. That was part of the Mark Martin study that was just completed this year, and we're going to do a second round of that in terms of what can we do to find other alternatives to get people out of our facility. Mental health is obviously a big one, and that's something that we still need to continue to work on. We've had proposals in the past about building a alcohol mental health wing to our facility. One of the proposals is about $5 million. That's just for the construction, and of course you got the cost of manning that as well. So that's something that we will look at, and also look at the possibility of expanding our facility. I think one of the other things that we'll be looking at on the criminal justice side is what do we do with our juvenile facility? It's a staff secure facility. We probably average 5 to 6 people in that facility a day. And of that, maybe 3 of them are Sarpy. We get some from Cass County and so forth. But we have a lot of programs that are in there. We have schools for kids that are in the facility, have schools for for kids that are not able to go to regular school any longer, that have been kicked out of school. And we have our care program, which are for kids that are being monitored by our staff that still live at home or in foster care or some other care. And we have about 80 kids on that. But that facility is probably being really underutilized, though I don't know that there's a real good way of repurposing that. That's something that we can look at as well. We've also looked at what can we do to improve community engagement, let the public know. I think that's one thing we're probably maybe all a little weak on, and is letting the public know really what we do, and really patting ourselves on the back once in a while for the good things we do. We always hear about the bad things in the press, but there's a lot of good that gets done in the county government arena. We just need to probably take more credit for that. Douglas County obviously just hired a person, that Fred Huey does that along with his lobbying duties and every other thing we should probably throw on his plate to do. But we could also do better than that. One of the areas though that we're probably a little weak on was our 7th strategic plan, and that's really one that deals a lot with personnel, our workforce, and how do we provide for succession planning? How do we help our employees improve themselves professionally? How do we look at the possibility of combining certain offices to make us more efficient? And then, so those are things that we need to look at. We also were looking at the possibility of doing more and improved performance appraisals. Some departments do a good job of that, some don't. And then we're also going to maybe look at ways that we could pay for performance, and we haven't really followed up on that. That's really another human resource thing that there for a while I think we just hired a new HR director probably about a year ago. I think she's still trying to get into some of these things. These are all things from a strategic plan that we could do a lot better on than we are in some of the other activities that are probably seen more by the public and that are more demanding of us from the public, like infrastructure needs. So that's what we have, and it's something that we haven't really looked at probably for a couple of years, and we probably want to readjust some of these and refocus ourselves in the next coming years.
Can you talk a little bit more about the economic development, what you actually do in that arena? Is it just being at the table supporting? Do you give dollars to projects?
We give, and have been giving for many years, probably 20 or more years, funds to support the Sarpy County Economic Development Corporation. It's housed out of the Omaha Chamber. I think we Right now, we're about $90,000 a year. They help support that. The rest of it they get through other private organizations through membership. We also help them in terms of infrastructure. So when they bring a facility to us, to the community, we a lot of times are asked to help make road improvements or do sanitary sewer improvements, which we spend quite a few millions of dollars on. We also work with the state to try to get site and building fund dollars to help support that. We've been pretty lucky in terms of getting site and building fund dollars from the state. I would venture to say probably $4 or $5 million over the last couple of years. And we'll have a request for another $1 million for a project that we're working on that'll come through Papillion actually, because it's Arizona jurisdiction, but it'll help us with some infrastructure needs. So we both support them just in membership to keep the organization going, because they employ 2.5 people. And then also through infrastructure when they bring projects. So it's like Fidelity, Travelers, all the big data centers primarily in the last few years.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mark? What about, you guys want to
I guess this will be quick. We don't have a strategic plan.
Oh, can I move down there?
You like it now.
But we talk about it almost.
Yeah. We not only talk about it, but we do a heck of a lot more strategic planning than we give ourselves credit for, quite frankly. What we did do to try to develop a strategic plan is we engaged Professors Jerry Dykert and Bob Blair from the UNO to lead a discussion to get started on developing a strategic plan. We had 2 sessions with the professors, and they were both a lot of information that was shared. We got a selected demographic and economic information that Jerry Dykert put together, which is very good information about where our population is going, the makeup of the population, that sort of thing. One of the things that we focused in on in those discussions, of course, is what are the 3 critical challenges, external challenges that affect the future growth and development of the county, and second question, what are the 3 most critical challenges facing the Lancaster County Board? Of course, you're going to get some overlap in those, but the challenges that we identified, certainly infrastructure needs and finance, public safety financing, criminal justice, and the third one, just increasing our efficiencies. We had others that appeared on the list, economic development, but since 90% of our population lives in Lincoln, and then it becomes rural very fast with about 13 rural villages scattered throughout, most of our zoning jurisdiction is agricultural. The social safety net made it on that list, and then concern for taxes. Challenges facing the board, we identified budget and finance, which I think everybody will relate to. Also mentioned previously, human resource management, organizational development. It's a different workforce now. Recruiting and keeping talented workers is becoming more and more of a challenge. And then another big one that we identified was the unfunded mandate challenge, and especially the new unfunded mandates that come down from the legislature. So if we step back and give ourselves some credit, and I was saying for everyone else too, we do have a very strong strategic plan in the area of legislative priorities. And we've been doing that for decades, and that addresses a lot of these needs that we have. We have a combined City of Lincoln, Lancaster County Comprehensive Land Use Plan, the 2040 plan, which we follow religiously. Well, we're always looking at that. We're updating it again this year. That's strategic planning. We also have a building commission that has completed and every year updates our facilities master plan for the buildings. And we've relied on that since the 90s and have made a number of good decisions on facilities that save taxpayers money in your joint use facilities and that sort of thing. So we don't have a strategic plan per se, but we've always been global in our thinking, trying to look ahead in our thinking. We just don't have it all on one little piece of paper. But that's certainly the way I've found in my experience that the county board operates and will continue to operate.
Question for Carrie? The other topics was payroll systems. Go put that one.
It'll be quick. So in Lancaster County, we utilize our human resources, a joint agency with the city of Lincoln. We currently have a payroll system that both the city and the county use. Its name is Tesseract. It was bought out by a company called Kronos. Kronos bought the company just for the customer base, the customers, and they're discontinuing support of Tesseract. And so now we're looking at, City of Lincoln, Lancaster County is looking at a new payroll software. There's a couple that we're looking at. One of them is JEI Edwards that does our, JD Edwards that does some of the other accounting software for the county and city. So I was tasked with finding out what Sarpy and Douglas County uses as a software, because a lot of it has to do with the different functions that go along with those software. And we're talking a huge investment, several $100,000. So any insight in the software program would be very helpful.
Yeah, and Todd, I might just mention something here too. You know, we're also really kind of getting into the HR side of things too. So we're really dealing with payroll, which is no doubt the big issue. You know, our HR director will always remind us that if you have a payroll problem, you're going to hear about it. So we're focusing on the payroll side, but we're also looking at the HR side of things where you start getting into a little bit more of tracking time, things like that. So I would be interested, you know, in just whether the two other counties use that HR side of things, get into tracking time so that when I go in and I log in the morning, it clocks me in, things like that. So I'd just kind of be interested in that also.
Dan Esch, Douglas County Clerk. We use Oracle Time and Labor. I know HR, we use Oracle for a lot of things. We do use it for tracking time and for our human resources department uses it as well. May not be the best guy to talk about it, but I do know some offices have what's called self-service, where the employees individually enter in their time. You can do it daily, but just as long as every 2 weeks when the pay period is over, you just got to make sure that you've gone in, entered in your time. Some departments have it where the supervisors do it for the employees. I guess I honestly.
Do you know when was it that you actually went to the payroll system that you're on now?
Oracle was implemented 2002, 2003 that year. But, I gotta be honest with you, I'm not sure the overall cost. The city uses Oracle as well. They don't use it as much as the county does. I just sent someone a text to see if they could answer. I don't even know if they use it for payroll, honestly. They have Oracle.
No.
They don't, okay.
So do you know, back in that time frame, did you go through an RFP process?
Yeah, we did. I wasn't around then, but we did. I know that.
Oracle, we basically came for our whole financial system overhaul. That's what it focused on. And then what you do is you buy certain modules for it. So the payroll module, the HR module, and we've gotten, like Dan said, to use quite a bit of it for things. But we did go in with the city, but they don't use it like we do. And it's sometimes very difficult. And if you make changes, it's difficult. If you're adding, it's difficult. And it takes a lot of resources.
And the big issue is back pay.
that's one of the challenges that we're looking at.
Unlike the retro pay, when you have unions negotiations that don't get finalized until 18 months later, then you got to go back and do that back pay. And we have a few payroll individuals that are very nervous of leaving the system that we're on because it kind of handles that retro pay right now, which will no doubt change things up.
I can understand. Since I took over the position of clerk, I used to really look forward to payday, and I still do. But come every other Friday, I'm also very nervous that there's a problem. But I'm just saying, I understand the hesitancy to move from different payroll systems because if something's screwed up, you're getting a lot of phone calls the next day. So I don't know if I answered it all. If you have better or questions I can answer, I can definitely.
And we may just have to go without an RFP because we have one option, but it's very expensive.
And we're also getting in, we're also looking at the, do we move to somewhat a cloud type issue where we get charged back by number of employees a month versus, right now we house the system ourselves, we maintain that ourselves, we pay for all the upgrades, we do all that versus, all the upgrades will be done, it's just going to cost you so much per employee per month. So we got some of those issues we're trying to deal with too.
Sarpy County uses ADP as our payroll service provider. It is a cloud-based system. Our HR department looked at a Kronos HRIS system. They've had some challenges implementing that. The interface with ADP wasn't quite as workable as I think we were led to believe, and I think they are getting ready to walk away. We don't do a time and attendance. We've got about 660 employees. We pay every 2 weeks. And like Dan, payday is always a challenge. I always tell people, you got a third of our workforce that carries weapons. It's always you want to keep them happy, and the good thing about ADP, they take care of all our tax filings and changes in federal law and et cetera. And if they make a mistake, we would be responsible for taxes, but they are responsible for any penalties and interest. So.
So Fred, do you pay by number of employees?
Yeah.
Okay.
That does not include HR, though, not an HR package.
Okay.
We could get one, but it's all
And the last one was zero-based budgeting, which we kind of already talked about unless somebody else has conversation, but I think Roma hit it on the head when, any type of change that you talk about or you want to make, the education of that change is key. Because, it's all innate in all of us that change is hard, and but that shouldn't stop us from looking at different ways of doing things that could potentially lead to doing things better and more efficient. So with that, the last thing, I really don't have a presentation on the NACO other than I'm looking forward to, one of the things National NACO does, and being a member of it, is they keep us very, very updated and in tune with what's going on at the federal level. And we all know that there could be big changes on the horizon for us, which obviously will affect our states and then our counties. And so one of the things that I'm so impressed with what they do is they do a lot of the research on stuff. So any change that's going to occur at the national level, they'll actually bring it down and tell you how it will affect your county. And so if you haven't been on the site lately, go on their site and really look at their policy briefs. Look at the County Explorer. get involved in a committee at the national level, because it really does have an impact on what we do at the local level. And those relationships that you have built through that organization, what we can do together, it's made a big difference. We talked, I think every county right now talked about the civic engagement, making our citizenry understand what county governments do. NACO a few years back on the national level did a phenomenal job of putting out information about why counties matter and why counties are relevant. And when I go to speak, I use that. There's a video, there's also paper, a little brochure that you can use. And we're actually, now that we have a PIO, one of the jobs that we're looking at doing is taking that national brochure and tailoring it to the county. So the brochure talks about everything under the sun that counties do, some of which all counties don't do everything. Some do different things, but there are things that are like that counties across the country, the 3,069 of them that do the same thing. We can drill down now and make that brochure specific to your county. And so as we go out and we talk to our citizenry, and we try to educate not only the public, but internally. We found that through our County Government Awareness Committee that most departments didn't even know what the other department or office did. They knew people, they might have exchanged emails, but they really didn't have a true understanding of what each of those departments and offices did. And what it led to was a lot more cooperation and a lot more working together between departments. So a prime example is our community mental health center and our jail, our corrections facility. They were both basically seeing a lot of the same people, serving a lot of the same people in different capacities, but there was never really a conversation between them. Well, now we have 17 employees through our community mental health center that actually touch our correction facility through programming that we do. So it's really a good educational and building of the awareness not only within your county but also for your general public. And the National NACO has tools which can help you. We have in Douglas County a PowerPoint for County Government 101. And for instance, I just spoke at the Chamber has that leadership program, and they have somebody from the state and the county and the city come in and talk about what your form of government does to the new leaders that are coming in to your community. And I use that PowerPoint, and they're really amazed at the number of things that we do. County government touches a lot of things, but yet we're the most misunderstood, and really they don't really know what we do, but once they see this and once they start asking questions, they're pretty amazed by it. So NACO at the national level as well as at our state level have given us the tools at the local level to go out and explain why counties matter. And I encourage all of you to take a look at that. If you need anything, I'd be more than happy to help you get any of the tools that you need. With that, is there any other conversation that anyone wants to have? I thank you on behalf of the Douglas County Commission that we've sponsored the Tri-County Retreat this year. It was a great one again. I'm sure we'll have further conversations about our legislative items and the various other items that we talked about today. But thank you very much.